Section 1. The Nuclear Power Plant and Springfield's Mutation. Let's start with something quiet. Not loud, not alarming, just a slow, creeping realization that settles over you the longer you sit with it. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant has been part of this show since the very beginning. It sits on the edge of town like a permanent fixture. Those two iconic cooling towers releasing their soft plumes into the Springfield sky. For most people watching, it's just part of the scenery. It's background. It's the place Homer drives to every morning in his little car, past the same stretch of road, past the same trees, into the same parking lot. It's a running joke, mostly. The incompetent safety inspector, the ancient billionaire who can't remember his name, the donut eating, the sleeping at the console. We've laughed at it for decades. But here's what happens when you stop laughing and start looking. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town of Springfield. And across its decades of operation, under the ownership of Charles Montgomery Burns, it has accumulated a record of safety violations, environmental contamination, and institutional negligence that, when you actually sit down and catalog it, becomes something genuinely difficult to brush aside. A surprise safety inspection once found 342 violations. Not 3, not 12. 342 distinct, documented failures of the facility to meet basic safety standards. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code at the time was $56 million. Burns, a man whose net worth dwarfs that figure by several orders of magnitude, refused to spend it. The explanation the show gives is almost casual. He didn't want to admit the problems existed, because admitting they existed might prompt someone to start asking what those problems had already done to the people living nearby. Think about that for a moment. The decision wasn't financial. It was strategic silence. And the violations themselves aren't minor paperwork errors. The show documents them with a kind of cheerful specificity that, in retrospect, feels almost like confession. Radioactive waste dumped directly into local waterways. Radioactive material disposed of on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's actual desk. Cooling towers held together not with engineering, but with chewing gum. Rodents running through the facility that glow in the dark, their fur illuminated by whatever they've absorbed from their environment. And then the detail that the show drops and never picks back up again, the one that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. Human skeletons in the basement. Not one, not an old one from a different time. Skeletons, plural. Human remains inside a working nuclear facility. The show shows them to you, casually, as part of a scene, and then it moves on. No investigation, no explanation, no character pauses to ask what happened. The bones are just there, a detail among details, and Springfield closes its eyes. The man standing between all of this and the rest of the population is Homer Simpson. The show's creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. In the episode where it's revealed that a crayon has been lodged in Homer's brain since childhood, literally occupying space in his frontal lobe and physically reducing his cognitive function, the show treats this not as a medical emergency but as a plot device. Homer sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. In one episode, he caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core out of pure, uncomplicated curiosity about whether it would grow larger. That is the man whose literal job title is safety inspector. That is the person whose signature on a clipboard is supposed to mean this facility is safe. He has held that job for over 3 decades. Now, here's where the theory takes hold, because it doesn't stay theoretical for long. In Season 2, a fish is pulled from a river near the power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. It becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses it as evidence of environmental contamination. Burns is eventually pressured into eating the fish on live television to prove it's harmless. The town watches, accepts this as sufficient evidence, and moves on. No follow-up testing, no water quality study. No one sits down with a map of Springfield and asks the obvious question. If the fish that live in the river downstream from the plant have developed an extra eye, what exactly is happening to the people who have been drinking from that same river for their entire lives? The answer to that question takes until Season 8 to arrive, and it arrives sideways, buried inside a different storyline entirely. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer sees something in the woods near town, something glowing, something that moves with an unusual gait, stumbling through the trees in a daze, radiating visible light in the darkness. The town panics. FBI agents are called in, real ones, Mulder and Scully from the X-Files, operating within the show's universe as legitimate investigators. The episode is framed as a mystery, building toward a dramatic reveal. And when the truth finally comes out, the creature in the woods isn't an alien at all. It's Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with radiation and experimental chemistry, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without them, his systems collapse. His body literally cannot sustain itself through normal biological processes anymore. It requires an external dose of radiation on a precise weekly schedule, administered with the regularity of a maintenance check, and the side effect of this treatment is that immediately after each session, Burns wanders out of the facility in a euphoric, disoriented state, glowing softly, stumbling through the woods near Springfield like something from another world. The entire town saw this and thought, alien, not the power plant, not radiation, an alien from outer space. That's how completely the idea of environmental contamination has been sealed off from the collective consciousness of Springfield. The glowing man in the woods who comes from the nuclear facility isn't evidence of a radiation crisis. He's a visitor from another galaxy. The explanation that would require the town to confront something real gets replaced immediately with the explanation that requires them to confront nothing at all. And in the Simpsons movie, the accumulation of evidence becomes impossible to dismiss in even the most generous reading. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so catastrophic, so far beyond the capacity of local government to manage or ignore, that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's fictional universe, makes a formal determination. The town must be physically sealed. A massive glass dome is lowered over Springfield to prevent its pollution from spreading beyond its borders. The United States federal government looked at this town and concluded that the only responsible course of action was containment. Not cleanup, not investigation, containment. Like a biohazard, like a spill that can't be allowed to spread. And every resident of Springfield was still inside when the dome came down. Now look at the residents themselves. Look at them the way you'd look at something you were trying to understand, rather than something you were watching for entertainment. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that doesn't correspond to normal human anatomy. His eyes protrude in a way that, in a real medical context, would prompt immediate concern about intracranial pressure. He has 4 fingers on each hand, which is true of everyone in Springfield and no one outside it. His IQ, as established by the show's own creator, sits at a level that qualifies as a clinical cognitive disability. And his body absorbs physical trauma in a way that has no biological explanation. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen from significant heights, been struck by vehicles, survived explosions, and returned from each of these events without lasting physical consequence. His healing rate isn't just cartoon resilience. Even within the logic of the show's universe, where other characters are shown to suffer permanent consequences from injury, Homer's recovery is distinct and anomalous. His pain tolerance is documented as being essentially limitless. His capacity to survive things that should be fatal has been demonstrated so many times it's been folded into the background of his character, treated as just a quirk, a running joke, rather than what it might actually be. A physiological adaptation. Marge Simpson shares the same protruding eyes. Her hair defies gravity in a tower of blue that she has maintained in the same precise shape for 36 years without variation, something that no natural hair growth pattern could sustain. She was briefly employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant herself, meaning she had direct exposure to the same facility, the same violations, the same ambient radiation that has been seeping through the cracked infrastructure for decades. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie were all born in Springfield. They were all conceived and carried by parents who had already been living in this environment for years. They grew up drinking the same water, breathing the same air, playing under the shadow of those cooling towers every day of their childhoods. And every one of them has the same physical characteristics that you won't find in any population outside Springfield's borders. The spiky hair that holds its shape without product, the overbites, the 4-fingered hands, the yellow skin. The yellow skin is the detail that the radiation theory hinges on because of where it stops. When a guest character comes to Springfield, when a celebrity appears in the show, when someone arrives from outside the town, they look different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are more normally placed. Their features sit within a range that more closely approximates actual human anatomy. The standard explanation for this is simple. That's just the art style. The Simpsons looks the way it looks, and guest characters are drawn with slightly more realistic proportions to signal that they come from outside the show's main visual vocabulary. But stay with the in-universe logic for a moment. Within the world of the show, there is a visible, observable difference between the people who live in Springfield and the people who don't. If you were looking at this the way you'd look at any other population anomaly, the question you'd be asking is, why? Why do all the people inside the town share a set of physical characteristics that the people outside the town don't exhibit? What is the variable? What is the environmental factor that applies to one group and not the other? The contamination zone has a perimeter, and the mutation stops at the perimeter. The animals reflect this too. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same protruding eyes as his owners, the same proportional deviations from what you'd see in a normal greyhound. Blinky the three-eyed fish is the most famous example, but the show has populated Springfield's environment with wildlife that shows signs of aberrant development throughout its run. The plant's runoff reaches the ecosystem, and the ecosystem shows it. Burns is aware of this. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes, not through dramatic confession, but through accumulating detail. Burns has personal physicians. He funds private medical research. He undergoes the weekly treatments we've already discussed. He has an entire pharmaceutical infrastructure capable of synthesizing experimental compounds. Burns understands radiation at a personal, intimate level, because radiation is what's keeping him alive. He doesn't theorize about what his plant does to biological systems. He experiences it in his own body every single week, and then manages those effects with resources that no one else in Springfield has access to. He knows what the plant is doing to the town. His continued employment of Homer isn't negligence. The show offers evidence that it's deliberate. When a group of German investors briefly purchased the plant, the first thing they did was terminate Homer's employment. The second thing they did was commission an assessment of the cost to bring the facility up to code, an assessment so staggering it nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back immediately and rehired Homer on the same day. A competent safety inspector would have that plant shut down within a week. Homer's presence ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension, its population, a population that the theory argues has been made less capable of resistance by the same contamination that fills their water and their air. The crayon episode adds one more layer to this. In Season 12, Homer has the crayon removed from his brain. His IQ rises dramatically. He becomes articulate, perceptive, analytically capable. He begins to see Springfield with clarity for the first time, and the experience is unbearable. He can see his job for what it is. He can see the system he's been embedded in for decades. He can see the architecture of his own life clearly enough to understand that he's been living inside something designed to keep him exactly where he is. The intelligence is devastating. He has the crayon put back in. He chooses to return to the fog. But the question the show never asks is how the crayon got there in the first place. Homer went through childhood, adolescence, and adulthood visiting doctors in Springfield, receiving medical care in Springfield, and not a single physician ever detected a foreign object lodged in his skull. Either every doctor in this town is catastrophically incompetent beyond any reasonable explanation, or the medical establishment in Springfield, like the safety inspector and the municipal government and the water authority, is compromised. If Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of a town he essentially owns, then the crayon's presence isn't just an accident. It's evidence that the system extends further than the power plant gates. The radiation theory doesn't explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains the shape of the entire show. The characters don't age because their biology has been altered at a cellular level by decades of contamination. The town resets after disasters because the population's capacity for sustained critical memory has been compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives things that would kill an ordinary person because his body has developed adaptations that make him resilient in ways that a normal human being simply isn't. Burns survives over a century because he's been managing his own radiation exposure with resources no one else can access. And nobody questions any of it because the same contamination that shaped their bodies has also shaped the limits of what their minds are able to demand answers about. Springfield isn't a quirky cartoon town. It's a contamination zone with a zip code. The residents aren't eccentric, they're symptomatic. And the power plant that provides their electricity and employs their neighbors and poisons their water and irradiates their children isn't background scenery. It's the engine the whole thing runs on. Every yellow face and every bulging eye and every impossible recovery and every forgotten disaster traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible material into the same water table, quietly shaping the same population that can't figure out why the fish have 3 eyes, or why nobody in this town ever seems to get any older. The plant isn't just part of the show. It's the reason for the show. And the residents of Springfield will spend the rest of their lives not knowing that, because knowing it would require the one thing that the plant has already taken from them. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment below and tell me where you are and what time it is. There's something about knowing someone else is lying in the dark somewhere listening to this that makes the whole thing feel a little less strange. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot more ahead. Section 2. Homer's Coma Theory. Close your eyes for a moment if you want. Let what we just talked about settle in. The plant, the contamination, the yellow skin and the borrowed time, and the billionaire who glows after his weekly treatments hold all of that. Now consider the possibility that none of it is real. Not in the way the radiation theory describes anyway. Consider the possibility that every theory, every pattern, every mystery we've been tracing through 36 seasons of this show exists not in a town called Springfield, but inside the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed, completely unconscious, dreaming. This is the Homer coma theory. It is the most popular, most debated, and most internally consistent fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. And once you understand the specific episode that generated it and the specific date it aired, it becomes very difficult to watch the show the same way again. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The title suggests something modest and self-referential, a relaxed tour through the show's earlier moments. And for most of its runtime, that's exactly what it is. Bart pulls a series of April Fool's pranks on Homer, each one escalating beyond the last. The final prank involves Bart taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker. The can is shaken to a degree of internal pressure that the human body cannot survive. Homer opens it. The explosion is violent enough to hospitalize him. So far, this is a Simpsons episode. It is exactly as absurd and as physically impossible as the show asks you to accept on a regular basis. Homer goes to the hospital. He's resting in bed, recovering, and across the room there's a vending machine. He wants a candy bar. He reaches for it. The machine tips. It falls. It crushes him. And Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a coma. A clinical, medically described coma. Not a dream sequence flagged with a wavy screen transition. Not a fantasy cutaway. The show presents this as a real event within its universe. Homer is unconscious. His family waits. 7 weeks pass. The episode ends with Homer appearing to wake up. Bart is at his bedside, tearful, confessing that the whole escalating prank chain was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling Bart. The family laughs. The show treats this as a resolution. Everything returns to normal. But in the final moments of that episode, something is disclosed that the show never returns to in any meaningful way. During the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function. Not metaphorically, not as a punchline. 5% of his cognitive capacity. Gone. Destroyed. Never coming back. And Homer's response to being told this, his response to learning that a portion of his brain is permanently non-functional, is to laugh. He says he doesn't understand why he's laughing. The family finds it charming. No one suggests this is alarming. The episode ends. The Homer coma theory, originally proposed by a Reddit user, begins with a single question about that moment. What if he didn't actually wake up? What if the scene where Homer opens his eyes and strangles Bart is not a recovery, but a continuation of the coma? What if that moment of apparent awakening is the last piece of conscious dreaming before the unconscious mind fully takes over? And what if every episode that has aired since April 1993 is a dream generated by the slowly deteriorating brain of a man who is still lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General? This sounds like the kind of theory that requires you to perform a lot of creative, interpretive work to sustain it. But the evidence the theory assembles is genuinely unsettling in how well it holds together. Start with the most obvious piece of supporting evidence, which is the tonal shift. In the seasons before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic, it was always a cartoon, but the storylines were built around recognizable human problems. Homer tries to quit drinking and struggles with the compulsive return to the bottle. Marge begins to develop feelings for another man and grapples with what that says about her marriage. Lisa forms a serious attachment to a substitute teacher and has to process the grief when he leaves. Bart faces the real possibility of being held back a year and has to sit with what that means about his future. These are stories about money and marriage and academic failure and the specific loneliness of being smart in a household that doesn't quite have the capacity to understand you. They are, at their core, human stories rendered through the lens of absurdist animation. After the coma, everything changes. The shift isn't gradual, it isn't subtle. It is dramatic enough that even casual, occasional viewers have noticed and commented on it for decades. Homer goes to space. He joins a secret society that turns out to be the Stonecutters, an organization that has been manipulating every aspect of Springfield's civic life for generations. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer discovers that his mother is alive, has been alive this entire time, and has spent decades as a fugitive radical activist. Homer meets God, not as a metaphor, not in a dream sequence, but in a direct face-to-face theological conversation. Then he meets God again. He holds dozens of different jobs over the course of the series, a number that eventually climbs above 100. He befriends more celebrities than most people encounter in a lifetime. He travels to dozens of countries. He survives physical trauma that would be medically unsurvivable many times over. The show went from a family sitcom about economic anxiety and domestic tension to something much stranger, much more fluid, much more willing to abandon the rules of cause and effect and physical reality that the early episodes honored. Fans have been arguing about when The Simpsons jumped the shark for 20 years. The coma theory argues that the answer isn't a judgment about writing quality, it's an observation about brain function. The show didn't get worse. Homer's brain got worse. The escalating surrealism of the later seasons isn't a creative failure, it's a symptom. There is a detail from 6 months before the coma episode that the theory treats as its most haunting piece of supporting evidence. In the season 4 premiere, Homer the Heretic, Homer has a direct conversation with God, an actual theological dialogue, face to face. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something. God tells Homer that he will one day learn the meaning of life, but that the time for that revelation hasn't arrived yet. God says, in essence, that Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches with a precision that, once you notice it, is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Within the logic of the show's universe, a universe where God exists and has direct conversations with residents of Springfield, the most straightforward reading of that exchange is a warning. God told Homer that his conscious life was approaching its end, that what came next would be something other than the ordinary passage of days. And 6 months later, Homer went under. What the episode frames as a quirky theological gag is, under the coma theory, a prophecy being delivered to a man with 6 months left before his waking life ends. The aging problem, the fact that nobody in Springfield has aged a single day across 36 years of episodes, is the piece of evidence that the coma theory addresses most elegantly. Every other theory that attempts to explain the show's refusal to age its characters has to work harder than this one. The radiation theory proposes cellular mutation. The floating timeline explanation, which is the official position, points to industry convention. But the coma theory doesn't require any of that. It has the simplest answer imaginable. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer went into the coma on a specific day in April 1993. His children were specific ages on that day. His wife looked a specific way on that day. His friends, his neighbors, his coworkers, the interior of his house, the smell of Marge's cooking, the sound of Bart laughing, the particular blue of Lisa's dress, all of it was locked into memory at the exact moment the vending machine fell. And in the coma, the dream doesn't allow any of it to change, because the dreaming mind doesn't have any new information to update it with. Homer's brain cannot imagine Bart at 15 or 20 because Homer wasn't there to see Bart become 15 or 20. His children are frozen at the ages they were when he last saw them. His wife looks the way she looked on the morning before the accident. His memory of the world is the only material the dream has to work with, and that memory stops at April 1993. The celebrity appearances throughout the later seasons take on a different quality under this framework. Homer is lying in a hospital room. Sounds come to him through the unconscious fog. Voices from a television in the hallway, conversations between nurses at his bedside, radio programs from somewhere in the building. His dreaming mind absorbs these fragments, these names and voices, and cultural references that float through the ambient noise of the hospital and incorporates them into the dream. When Michael Jackson appears in Springfield, when Leonard Nimoy shows up, when dozens upon dozens of famous figures visit and interact with the Simpson family, the theory doesn't require you to explain why famous people keep coming to this ordinary town. It explains them as acoustic intrusions. They are voices that reached Homer's unconscious mind through the walls of the hospital room, processed by a dreaming brain, and translated into characters in the simulation. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield is, in this reading, someone Homer heard once through the fog of unconsciousness. A name from a television program. A voice from a radio. A word someone said at his bedside. His brain assembled a face and a personality around the sound and placed it in his dream because dreams do that. They make figures out of fragments. They build worlds from debris. The show itself acknowledged the coma theory in season 34. An episode called Lisa the Boy Scout contained what was described as a deliberately leaked fake deleted scene, a clip in which Homer wakes from a long coma and the reveal is made explicit. Every outlandish episode since a certain point was just a dream. The show's writers created this scene, fully animated it, gave it voice performances, and then framed it as a hoax, something planted by hackers, a scene that was never meant to be seen. The official message was, this isn't real. The coma theory is not the answer. But the fact that they made it is its own kind of evidence. The writers engaged with the theory seriously enough to animate a response to it. Their denial, their insistence that Homer is not in a coma, arrived inside a scene that depicted Homer waking from a coma. They showed you the theory confirmed in visual detail, and then told you it was a joke. The audience laughed. And the ambiguity remained exactly as rich as it was before they responded. Al Jean, the executive producer, addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it isn't true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. But there are specific questions he didn't answer. He didn't explain why no character in the show ages. He didn't address the dramatic tonal shift that occurs immediately after the coma episode. He didn't explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the vending machine fell. He didn't offer an account of why the show becomes progressively more detached from observable reality with each passing season, escalating in ways that follow a curve a dream following a deteriorating brain would produce. He said it's not true, and then he stopped talking about it. The theory persists because it does something that no official explanation has ever done successfully. It makes the show make sense, all of it simultaneously from a single premise. The aging freeze has a reason, the tonal shift has a reason, the celebrity appearances have a reason, the reset button that wipes consequences between episodes has a reason. Homer's physical indestructibility has a reason. Nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And a dreaming mind can't be killed by the dream it's generating. The part of this theory that stays with you long after the analytical case has been made is the emotional part. Because if the coma theory is true, then the show isn't a comedy at its core. It's something else entirely. Something much quieter and much more devastating. Homer's deepest wish is not complicated. It's not grand. It doesn't require the acquisition of anything. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still be in love with him. He wants Bart to still be his funny, frustrating, enormously alive little boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room, the sound of it drifting through the hallway. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in one arm, her weight against his chest. He wants the couch. He wants the television. He wants Friday evening in a house that is loud and messy and completely his. In the coma, the dream gives him everything he wants. His family is preserved exactly as it was on the day he lost consciousness. His children never grow beyond the ages they were when he last saw them. His wife never leaves. His life never ends. The dream runs the simulation forever, protecting him from the knowledge of what time has actually done, shielding him from the question of whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, whether his children have grown up and moved away, whether 30 years have passed in a hospital room that he has never left. Homer's coma dream isn't a nightmare. It's the closest thing to heaven that a man with Homer's desires could construct. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. And every time an episode ends, every time the credits roll and the family is still intact and everything is returned to how it was at the beginning, that isn't lazy writing. That's Homer's brain refusing to let the story stop, refusing to reach an ending. Because an ending means waking up, and waking up means finding out what's real. The theory will never be confirmed. The show will never commit to it. But it will never disprove it either, because the evidence for it is embedded in the structure of the show itself, placed there not as a deliberate puzzle, but as the natural consequence of a program that began changing in a specific, traceable way at a specific, traceable moment and never changed back. Nobody ages. The plots get stranger. The world gets less consistent. The family stays together at the center of it all, preserved, unchanged, exactly as Homer last remembered them. He found his way home at the end of every episode because in the dream, he never left. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Settle in a little deeper now. What we're about to go through is the greatest unsolved mystery in Simpsons history, and possibly the greatest sustained mystery in the history of American animated television. Yes, the show told us who did it. Yes, there was an official answer. And yes, that official answer has more holes in it than the cooling towers at the power plant. Let's start at the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. This aired in the summer of 1995, and The Simpsons did something that had never been attempted by an animated series before. It constructed a genuine whodunit. A real mystery with red herrings, planted evidence, multiple suspects, and a cliffhanger designed to keep the public guessing for an entire summer. The creative ambition of the thing matched the cultural moment. Fox promoted it as an event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special, treating the fictional crime as an actual unsolved case. There was a national contest inviting viewers to submit their guesses. The winner would be animated into a future episode. America was invested. The crime itself was almost operatically motivated. Burns had been on a campaign of destruction across the back half of Season 6. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget. He drove Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy. He created a sinkhole that collapsed the Springfield retirement castle. He injured the Simpson family's dog in the process of one of his schemes. And then, for his finale, he constructed a massive mechanical disc and used it to block out the sun over the entire town. Not metaphorically. He physically blocked the sun from reaching Springfield so that every resident would be forced to buy their electricity from his plant, since without sunlight, nothing else could generate power. It was villainous on a scale that even the show hadn't attempted before. Smithers, Burns' loyal assistant of decades, protested. Burns fired him on the spot. By the end of Part 1, every person in Springfield had a documented reason to want Burns dead. The show took its time building this out. Homer, because Burns had spent years failing to remember the name of an employee who had worked for him for decades. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its oil revenue funding. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because the sinkhole ended his livelihood. Tito Puente, because the music program was cut. Moe, because his bar went under. Smithers, freshly fired, spiraling. The entire town converged at a public meeting. The tension was explicit and physical. Multiple people were visibly armed. Then Burns arrived at the meeting. Confrontations occurred. Accusations were leveled. And then Burns staggered outside and collapsed on the town sundial with a single gunshot wound. His hands fell across two letters as he went down, W and S. Or, from Burns's perspective as he fell forward, M and S. The screen went black. America had 3 months to think about it. Part 2 aired in September 1995. The investigation played out as a comedic procedural. Chief Wiggum and his department stumbled through the case with their characteristic incompetence. Smithers confessed immediately and with great emotional weight, but his confession collapsed when it emerged that he had been blackout drunk during the relevant time period and had actually shot someone else entirely. He shot old Jasper in the wooden leg. Wrong victim, wrong location, wrong crime. Smithers was eliminated as a suspect. The investigation continued. Skinner had an alibi. Moe had an alibi. Tito Puente provided, in the show's immortal phrasing, the greatest alibi in television history. A full musical number explaining that he channeled his rage into samba, spending the evening performing rather than committing violence. One by one, the suspects were cleared. Then the evidence shifted. An eyelash was found on Burns's suit. DNA analysis identified it as belonging to a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. He had the most visible motive of anyone in town. He was arrested. He was about to be convicted. And then Burns regained consciousness and, from his hospital bed, identified his attacker. It was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop, because Burns is Burns. In the struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up, the gun discharged. Burns was shot, case closed. The official answer is a 1-year-old baby. Chief Wiggum notes, memorably, that no jury in the world would convict a baby, maybe Texas, he allows, but nowhere else. Maggie is effectively immune from prosecution by virtue of her developmental stage. The case is closed. Except the contest nobody won. Fox invited viewers to submit their guesses for who shot Burns. The prize, as noted, was to be animated into a future episode, which is a genuinely unusual and compelling incentive. Thousands of entries were submitted. And according to the DVD commentary for these episodes, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of contest entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody won on merit. The person who received the prize was chosen randomly and received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance because the correct answer was simply absent from the sample pool. The show's writers acknowledged on the same commentary that they were aware of one person who had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons newsgroup online on the night of Part 1's original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account, and by the time the producers attempted to track them down after the contest ended, the account had been deactivated. They could not find the one person who got it right. They issued an open invitation on the DVD for that person to come forward. As far as anyone has documented, they never did. Think carefully about what this means. The show's creators designed a mystery that they explicitly told the public was solvable from the clues contained in Part 1. They built a national contest around this premise. And when the answer was revealed, essentially no one had figured it out from those clues. Either the mystery was not as solvable as advertised, or the red herrings were so effectively constructed that they overwhelmed the actual evidence, or the answer didn't follow from the clues in the way the show implied it did. Any of these possibilities reflects on the integrity of the official solution. Now let's look at the clues themselves. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to W and S, or from his perspective, M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. The sundial was the central piece of physical evidence. It was the visual mystery the audience was meant to sit with for an entire summer, trying to decode the initials. And then Burns himself, in his account of the shooting, stated explicitly that his hands pointing to those letters was not intentional. He didn't fall in a way designed to communicate his attacker's identity. He simply fell. The sundial clue, the keystone of the official solution, was described as a coincidence by the victim it supposedly came from. The central clue is meaningless. Burns said so. Then there's the gun. Burns carried a firearm in a holster. At a point shortly before the shooting, that holster is shown to be empty. The gun was already missing before the attack occurred. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, which means the shooter was someone who either took the gun from Burns earlier or found it after it fell from his person. This is actually a potentially important piece of information. Most of the suspects at the town meeting came armed. They brought weapons because they were angry enough to consider violence. The person who shot Burns didn't bring a gun to the meeting. They used Burns's own gun, which means the shooting was either improvised or they had access to Burns's weapon through proximity. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So, does any number of other characters who weren't carrying weapons that night and found themselves near Burns after the meeting? There is Burns's last spoken words before he was shot. "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not alarmed. He greeted whoever approached him with the mild, almost pleasant acknowledgement you'd extend to someone familiar, someone you know, someone you don't consider a threat in that moment. Does Burns know Maggie Simpson? Has he interacted with her prior to this episode in any way that would create recognition on his part? The show doesn't establish any relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns barely recognizes Homer, a man who has worked for him for years, whose name he famously cannot retain. The idea that Burns would see a baby in a parking lot and respond with, "Oh, it's you," as if greeting a familiar acquaintance, requires a leap that the show never explains. "Oh, it's you" sounds like something you say to someone who has reason to be there. Someone whose presence in that specific location at that specific moment you understand without needing explanation, not a baby who happened to be in the parking lot. And then there's the season 18 development, which the show dropped so casually that many viewers missed it entirely. In that season, Homer claims that he was the one who shot Burns. He says this out loud, on camera, in a context where it could be heard. Nobody reacts, nobody investigates, nobody in Springfield's legal system, such as it is, reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line, a piece of ambient noise in a busy episode. There are two interpretations. Homer is lying for attention, which is entirely within his character and well documented as a behavioral pattern. Or the official verdict was wrong. Homer knows it was wrong because he was actually there when it happened, and the show is flagging this confession precisely because it trusts you not to take it seriously. The alternate endings add a final dimension to the question of the show's own commitment to its official answer. A complete alternate conclusion was animated in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. Not a rough sketch, a fully produced, fully voiced, complete ending. This was shown as part of a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses the Smithers ending explicitly by saying it wouldn't have made sense because all the Simpson DNA evidence would have had to be ignored, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. The line is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which was occurring in cultural consciousness at the same time as the Burns shooting episode aired. The show is explicitly invoking a real legal case in which a jury chose to discount DNA evidence in reaching an acquittal. The show is winking at you. It's telling you that dismissing DNA evidence isn't a hypothetical. It happens. And it's telling you that the official answer might not be the right answer. It's just the answer that was adopted, that was maintained, that serves everyone's interests better than the alternative. The Marge theory deserves sustained attention because the case for it is more coherent than it initially appears. Marge Simpson watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, collapse the retirement home where Homer's father lived, and then extinguish the sun over the town where her children were growing up. She had more reason to act than nearly anyone. She was not shown to be carrying a weapon at the town meeting, which fits the profile of someone who used Burns's own gun. She was in the vicinity, and the theory's most compelling element is its explanation for why Burns didn't identify her. Burns, the show established in an earlier episode, developed an infatuation with Marge. He pursued her with characteristic Burns intensity, and while that storyline resolved without lasting consequence, the emotional fact of it remained in the show's continuity. A man who has been genuinely taken with someone, who has harbored real feeling for them even within the distorted framework of his personality, might choose not to identify them as the person who shot him. He woke up, he looked around the hospital room, he saw who was waiting for him, and he pointed at the sundial instead. Maggie was the perfect answer because Maggie was safe. An infant cannot be prosecuted. An infant cannot be imprisoned. An infant's guilt carries no legal consequence. If someone in Springfield's power structure, or someone with access to Burns's ear in those first conscious moments after he woke up, wanted to protect the real shooter, There was no cleaner solution than attributing the crime to a child who could never be punished for it. The alternate endings the show produced, the alternate suspects the writers cycled through before landing on Maggie, including a fully developed version with Barney Gumble, all reflect the same underlying reality. The answer wasn't predetermined by the clues. The clues were adjusted to fit whatever answer the writers eventually settled on. The mystery was reverse engineered. The official solution was chosen for narrative convenience, not because it was the only answer the evidence supported. The final shot of the episode shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She checks to make sure no one is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as a confession, a private moment where the guilty party reveals her guilt to the audience. But you could also read it as a baby who witnessed something, who saw an adult fire a weapon, who is now replaying what she saw because that's what babies do with experiences that made an impression. She's not confessing, she's remembering. She watched someone shoot Burns, and her mind replays the action because infant minds don't process the weight of events through adult frameworks of guilt and disclosure. They replay what they saw. The greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Closed means everyone agreed to stop looking. Solved means the evidence actually pointed somewhere and stayed there when you looked at it. The Burns shooting case was closed. The evidence points in multiple directions simultaneously and always has. And the show, in its characteristically sideways way, has been telling you this for 3 decades in alternate endings and throwaway confessions and winking references to real-world miscarriages of justice. Someone shot Burns. Maggie was convenient. And the truth, wherever it actually lives, has never once tried to make itself difficult to find. The town just agreed not to look. Section 4. Mr. Burns and the Architecture of Immortality. There is a question embedded in the show that almost never gets asked directly because the show has been answering it obliquely for so long that most viewers have stopped noticing the question itself. It sits underneath the surface of every Burns scene, every reference to his medical history, every casual mention of events he claims to have witnessed personally. The question is simple. How is Charles Montgomery Burns still alive? Not in a rhetorical sense. Not as a joke about cartoon characters and their immunity to the normal passage of time. Within the established, internally consistent canon of The Simpsons, Burns is a medical impossibility, and the show knows it. The show has been building the case for his impossibility for decades, dropping details across episodes, accumulating evidence in ways that only become fully visible when you step back and look at the whole picture. Burns's age has been stated, implied, and contradicted across dozens of episodes. Consistent, precise arithmetic is difficult with a floating timeline. But every version of Burns's personal history places his birth somewhere in the latter half of the 19th century. He references personal memories from the period before the turn of the 20th century, with the casual, first-hand authority of someone describing last Tuesday. He speaks about the early 20th century not as history but as autobiography. He has described relationships with historical figures who have been dead for generations. He served in World War II, which places him in active military service approximately 80 years before the current episodes. By the most conservative possible reading of the available evidence, Burns is comfortably over 100 years old. Some readings of his backstory put him closer to 140, and he doesn't just exist, he functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with strategic sophistication. He manipulates municipal politics with precision. He devises schemes that require long-term planning, sustained attention, and a working understanding of modern finance, modern technology, and modern legal frameworks. His body is visibly frail. His physical strength is almost non-existent, but his mind operates at a level that makes him the most consistently effective actor in Springfield, the person most capable of identifying what he wants and constructing a path toward acquiring it. For someone over a century old, operating at a cognitive level that most people 30 years his junior would find demanding, the question of how he maintains this capacity is not a small one. The Springfield Files episode gives us the mechanism, though the show presents it in the context of an alien mystery and trusts the audience not to follow the implication back to its source. Burns undergoes weekly medical treatments. The show doesn't specify their exact composition, but describes them as an intensive regimen so loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy that the side effect is a visible green glow emanating from his body afterward. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without them, his biological systems would fail. He is dependent on this regimen the way a normal person is dependent on food and water, not as a preference, not as a comfort, but as a biological requirement. The margin for error is absolute zero. Miss one treatment, and the consequence is not illness or decline. The consequence is death. The presentation of this detail in the show is designed to be funny, a punchline to the alien mystery. But the implications, when you hold them steady and look at them without rushing to the next joke, are significant. Burns is not surviving through any natural biological process. He is being kept alive through artificial intervention that must be administered on a precise schedule. His life is maintained the way you maintain a machine, through scheduled servicing, through the application of specific materials at specific intervals, through the constant vigilance of a person who understands the protocol and ensures it is followed. That person is Smithers. Waylon Smithers has been Burns' assistant for decades, and the show has established across many episodes that Smithers' devotion to Burns is not purely emotional, though the emotional dimension is clearly present. Smithers manages Burns' schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns' physical condition with an attentiveness that borders on medical observation. Multiple episodes have shown that without Smithers' presence, without his management of the daily logistics of Burns' existence, Burns would rapidly become helpless in ways that extend well beyond inconvenience. Smithers knows where the treatments are administered. He knows the schedule. He knows what happens if the schedule slips. He is not devoted to Burns because he has nothing else. He is devoted because he understands that his absence is a death sentence. And that knowledge, held privately, unspoken, forms the actual foundation of their relationship. Burns holds power over Springfield. Smithers holds power over Burns. Neither of them acknowledges this dynamic openly, but it's there, running underneath every interaction, shaping every scene they share. The episode in which Burns is informed by a doctor that he has every disease known to medical science is presented as one of the show's funniest moments, and it is. The doctor tells Burns that he has every illness simultaneously, that they are all present in his body at the same time, and that because of this they exist in a state of biological gridlock, each disease canceling out the others, none able to progress to a fatal stage because they are all competing equally for dominance. The doctor calls this Three Stooges syndrome, 3 conditions trying to get through a doorway at once, and none of them able to move forward. His conclusion is that Burns is the sickest man in the country, but also, paradoxically, indestructible, because every force that should kill him is neutralized by every other force that should kill him. This is played for laughs and it lands. But if you accept the radiation theory from the first section, it acquires a different character. Burns's body isn't maintaining this equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly treatments are managing it. They don't cure his diseases. They keep them stable. They calibrate the balance, the precise state of mutual cancellation that prevents any single illness from gaining ground. Remove the treatments and the equilibrium collapses. Every disease surges simultaneously. The Three Stooges jam the doorway until the maintenance of their stalemate expires, and then they all come through at once. Burns's body is essentially being operated as a system. The treatments are the control rods, adjusting the reaction, preventing a meltdown. His doctors are the engineers. Smithers is the operations manager, and Burns himself is the reactor, the thing being sustained through continuous technical intervention rather than any organic capacity to sustain itself. His connection to historical events adds another dimension to the question. The show has depicted Burns referencing or participating in an extraordinary range of historical moments. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, and his role in that conflict is described as morally complicated at best. At one point, it's revealed that he stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and held onto it for decades. He references the Gilded Age as personal experience. He knew Howard Hughes. He has spoken about events from the early 20th century with the intimate familiarity of memory rather than the detached knowledge of historical record. The Burns family itself, as the show has depicted it across various episodes, is presented as one of the oldest continuous lineages of American wealth. Not new money, not industrial-era fortune, though Burns commands that too. Old money, the kind of money that predates the Industrial Revolution, that built infrastructure when infrastructure was being invented, that established the frameworks within which the generations that followed would operate. The Burns dynasty didn't accumulate wealth. They shaped the conditions under which wealth could be accumulated by others. This raises a question the show never directly addresses, whether Burns is unique or whether his family has always found ways to extend their lifespans. If the current Burns has been alive for over a century through artificial means, did previous Burns patriarchs employ equivalent strategies? Before nuclear radiation, before the specific medical technology that keeps the current Burns alive, were there other methods? The show doesn't answer this, but it does establish that the Burns family has maintained continuous control of its fortune and influence for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity doesn't happen through normal generational succession, through the ordinary transfer of assets from one generation to the next. It requires either remarkable consistency of purpose across multiple generations, or a situation where the generations don't actually change as often as normal human biology would suggest. Burns's relationship with death itself is worth examining carefully. He has come closer to dying than almost any other character in the show's history. He was shot by Maggie Simpson and survived. He has been hospitalized so many times it has become a recurring motif. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been abandoned in the wilderness, been poisoned, and every time he comes back, but he comes back through infrastructure, not through cartoon resilience. Burns doesn't bounce back from injury the way Homer does. Burns recovers because there are always resources waiting, always personnel in place, always institutional support structures that ensure his survival regardless of what happens to his physical form. His immortality isn't passive, it's engineered. It's the accumulated result of a century of deliberate investment in the systems required to keep him alive. Homer's indestructibility, whatever its source, happens to him. Burns's indestructibility is something he built. Every dollar he's spent, every institution he's influenced, every doctor retained, every politician accommodated, every deal struck in the service of maintaining his position and his access to the treatments that sustain him, it all serves one end. Keep Burns alive. Keep the regimen running. Keep the equilibrium balanced. Keep the reactor from melting down. Because if Burns dies, everything built around his survival stops. And Burns has constructed his empire in a way that makes his absence unthinkable. Springfield's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that only Burns's wealth can fund and maintain. The loop closes on itself. The town needs Burns alive because the town's economic foundation is the plant that Burns owns, and that only Burns's continued presence keeps operational. Burns needs the town as a captive market, a population he controls through their dependence on his power supply, and a laboratory in which the long-term effects of his operations can be observed. He is too expensive to die. The machine keeps running because all its components require all the other components, and Burns is the one who understands this and keeps every part of it funded. The town will keep paying for his survival for as long as he keeps the lights on, and the treatments ensure that he will keep the lights on indefinitely. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Infrastructure of Denial. There is an episode of The Simpsons that has been treated as a failure for nearly 30 years. It appears on worst of lists. It's cited repeatedly in discussions about when the show's quality declined. Harry Shearer, who voices more major characters in the show than almost anyone else in the cast, publicly expressed his displeasure with it. Critics argued that it destroyed a major character's backstory. Fans argued that it betrayed the audience's trust in the show's own continuity. It is consistently ranked among the weakest episodes in the series. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. It aired in September 1997, Season 9. And the argument being made here is not that the episode is good television in any conventional sense. It may not be. The argument is that it is the most important episode the show has ever produced, because it is the only episode in which Springfield performs its most fundamental act of collective maintenance and does so in full view of the audience, with all the machinery visible instead of off-screen where it usually happens. Here's what occurs. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service. During the celebration, a stranger enters, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner. The real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia, was believed dead, survived his captivity, escaped, and has come home after decades to discover that someone else has been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner for 20 years is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a kid with no prospects and no roots who was drafted into the army and served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity he could call his own, accepted her assumption. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the history, the mother, and the life. He lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years, until the real Skinner walked through the door. Now, everything that follows is what matters. The town holds a meeting. Both men are present. The truth is fully disclosed. Everyone in Springfield has access to the same information. Their principal is an imposter, a man who has been living a fraudulent life for 2 decades. The real Seymour Skinner, the actual person whose name and identity were taken, is standing in front of them. There is no ambiguity. There is no he said, she said. The truth is documented and visible, and everyone present understands it. And the town votes, not on how to respond to this revelation, not on what the appropriate consequences should be. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all, and the verdict is unanimous. They choose the lie. They choose Tamzarian. They choose the version of events that they are comfortable with over the version of events that is accurate. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree stating that the imposter is henceforth to be recognized as the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the man whose identity was stolen, the war hero who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his life occupied, is physically removed from Springfield. He is tied to a train car and expelled from the town. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever mention the truth of this situation again. Let that sit for a moment. A community collectively decided that their comfort was worth more than an accurate account of reality. They had definitive proof that the official narrative was false. The person whose identity formed the basis of that false narrative was standing in front of them, alive, available to verify every detail. And they chose the version they already knew. They sentenced the truth to exile and made speaking it a criminal act. The episode was criticized precisely because it was so jarring, because it felt arbitrary, because it seemed designed to dismantle a character that the audience had invested in for years without offering anything worthwhile in return. But here is what the criticism consistently missed. The episode is not arbitrary. It is describing something real about how Springfield operates. It is the first and only time the show allows you to watch this particular mechanism from the inside. Springfield has been performing this operation throughout its entire history. It just doesn't usually let you see the vote. Think about every catastrophe the town has survived and then forgotten. The dome, the asteroid that nearly destroyed it, the various invasions, environmental disasters, nuclear near misses, the blocking of the sun, the time the town was nearly dismantled by a monorail scheme. Each of these events should have left permanent marks on the community's consciousness. Each of them was severe enough to have fundamentally altered the town's understanding of its own situation. And every single time, by the next episode, everything has been reset. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody exhibits the psychological effects of having survived something catastrophic. The slate is clean. Fans call this episodic storytelling. It's a structural feature of the format, the need for each episode to function as a discrete unit, resetting to a neutral starting point to allow the next episode to introduce its own problems without being burdened by accumulated consequences. This is true. It's a real production consideration and a genuine feature of how the show is made. But The Principal and the Pauper offers a different way to think about it. Springfield resets between disasters not because the writers need it to for structural reasons, but because the town itself chooses to reset. Because the residents make an unspoken collective agreement that what happened didn't happen, that what is known isn't known, that the official version of events is the only version of events, and that anyone who insists on maintaining contact with the unsanctioned version of reality will be removed. This isn't a cartoon convention. This is a description of how certain communities actually function. Small towns in particular have documented and well-understood capacities for collective denial, scandals get buried, crimes get managed rather than prosecuted. Uncomfortable truths get rewritten through repeated social reinforcement until the revised version is the only version anyone can access. Not because individuals are malicious, though some may be, but because the community's survival, its economic and social coherence, depends on the maintenance of shared narratives that keep everyone oriented in the same direction. Springfield can't confront the truth about the power plant, because confronting the plant means confronting Burns. Confronting Burns means acknowledging what he's done to the town and continues to do. Acknowledging what Burns has done leads inexorably to the question of what consequences there should be. And consequences for Burns mean the dismantling of the economic infrastructure that the entire town depends on. The power plant goes dark, the jobs disappear. The monopoly that has kept Springfield's lights on for decades ceases to function. The town dies, so the town forgets. They vote to forget. They make it illegal to remember. Armin Tamzarian is still living as Seymour Skinner. He has been doing so since the moment the decree was issued, performing an identity that was legally assigned to him by community consensus. The real Seymour Skinner is somewhere beyond Springfield's borders, exiled from his own name, expelled because he constituted an uncomfortable truth that the town decided it couldn't afford. He is the last person in that storyline who knows what actually happened, and he has been effectively removed from any position from which he could make that knowledge matter. He was the canary. He showed up with proof that the official narrative was built on a fiction, and the town's response was not to thank him for the information. The town's response was to criminalize the information and exile the person carrying it. The coma theory, applied to this episode, gives it an additional dimension. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind constructed this specific scenario because it reflects something he needs to believe. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained through collective agreement. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become a real identity once enough people consent to treat it as real. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life, a constructed version, a dreamed version, can replace the real one without anyone having the right to call it out. Because that's precisely what the coma is. A dreamed life replacing the one that stopped in April 1993. And as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain its fictions, Homer's particular fiction can continue undisturbed. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. That's a category judgment and not a particularly useful one. What it is, more than any other episode the show has produced, is an X-ray. It lets you see the bones of the operation. The machinery that makes every reset possible. The vote that makes collective amnesia a civic institution rather than a quirk of animation. The moment where Springfield stopped pretending to forget things organically and showed you, in explicit detail, the process by which a community can decide that reality is a policy choice. The last honest man in that story was tied to a train and sent away. And the town went back to normal. As it always does. As it always will. Section 6. Maggie Simpson. The Silent Strategy. There is a character in this show who has been in every season, in most episodes, who sits at the center of the Simpson family in nearly every domestic scene, who has been present for more of the show's history than almost any other character, and who remains the most genuinely mysterious person in Springfield. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has never learned to speak in any consistent, meaningful way. She communicates primarily through the sound of her pacifier and the occasional gesture. Her name is Maggie Simpson, and she is almost certainly the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. Let's establish what she has actually done, as a factual catalog, before we get into the interpretation. She is the officially identified shooter of Charles Montgomery Burns, the wealthiest and most powerful man in Springfield. Whether or not she did it, the legal system of Springfield found this credible enough to close a murder investigation on the basis of her guilt. She organized and led a rebellion among the infants at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, defeating a tyrannical caregiver and liberating her peers from an oppressive institutional environment. She has saved her family's life on multiple occasions through direct physical intervention, operating in situations where the adults around her were incapacitated or oblivious. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that test above what standardized metrics can accommodate. She has been tested and found to possess an intelligence quotient that the testing instruments themselves can't adequately measure. And through all of it, she has not said a word. One word, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a single episode, was the entirety of her verbal output over 36 years of continuous existence. She has watched, she has listened, she has processed, and she has maintained her silence with an absolute consistency that, when you really look at it, cannot be explained by developmental delay. Start with the shooting, which we've already examined from the mystery angle. Set aside for a moment the question of whether she actually pulled the trigger. Focus instead on what happens after. A baby is identified as the person who committed an act of violence against the most powerful adult in Springfield. The police investigate. The evidence is considered, and the official conclusion reached by Chief Wiggum and his department is, yes, this infant did this, and there is nothing we can do about it. Because no system of accountability that exists was designed to process an infant's guilt. Maggie was identified as the shooter and found immune from consequence in a single move. Now watch the final scene of that episode. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She performs a slow, deliberate scan of her surroundings, checking corners, checking the door, confirming that she is unobserved. Then, when she is certain no one is watching, she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. Analyze that sequence of behaviors. Checking to confirm solitude before performing an action. That is not reflexive infant behavior. Reflexive infant behavior doesn't involve privacy assessments. What Maggie did in that scene, whatever her intent, required situational awareness, the ability to track the movements of other people, the recognition that certain behaviors have different consequences depending on who observes them, and the volitional control to wait until the relevant observers have left before performing the behavior. These are cognitive functions associated with a considerably more developed stage of psychological maturity than her developmental age would suggest. She waited until she was alone. She checked. Then she acted. That sequence is strategic. Even if the motion itself is nothing more than infant imitation, the decision to perform it only when unobserved suggests a level of social intelligence that a 1-year-old, by conventional developmental markers, should not possess. The theatrical short The Longest Daycare, released in 2012 and screened before Ice Age, Continental Drift, offers the most sustained and detailed examination of Maggie's cognitive capacity that the franchise has produced. It runs for 7 minutes. It has no dialogue. And in those 7 minutes, it depicts Maggie doing the following: observing and correctly assessing a complex institutional environment on her first visit, identifying the relevant threat in that environment, a bullying peer named Gerald who wants to harm a caterpillar she has decided to protect, developing a series of strategies to neutralize that threat given her physical and institutional constraints, executing those strategies in correct sequence, adapting when circumstances change, improvising when the planned approach fails, completing her objective by releasing the butterfly into the wild despite the active opposition of both Gerald and the daycare's supervisory staff, and departing without anyone having the clear understanding of what she actually accomplished or how she did it. All of this happens in the body of a child who falls over while trying to walk. Her motor development is exactly where you'd expect a 1-year-old's to be. Her balance is poor. Her physical reach is limited. Her speed is the crawling speed of a baby. But her decision-making is without error. Every choice she makes during that 7-minute sequence is the correct choice. Every adaptation to a changing situation reflects an accurate understanding of the variables involved. She is operating at a cognitive level that her body cannot support, and she succeeds because she compensates for every physical limitation with a mind that is working at a level several developmental stages beyond what should be possible. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly on multiple occasions. The results vary from episode to episode, which is itself a kind of commentary on the limitations of the instruments being used, but the pattern that emerges from the accumulated evidence is consistent. Maggie consistently measures as cognitively anomalous in the upward direction. not average, not high average, beyond what the available measuring tools are designed to accommodate. And the family doesn't notice. Or, more precisely, they notice in individual moments and then don't know what to do with the information, and so they set it aside. Homer and Marge are managing the perpetual chaos of having Homer be Homer, which is a full-time occupation. Bart is producing his own constant stream of emergencies. Lisa is fighting her perpetual battle for intellectual recognition in a household and community that are fundamentally structured around rewarding other things. In all of that noise, the baby in the corner who isn't crying, who isn't demanding attention, who isn't creating problems, doesn't get looked at carefully. She gets accommodated. She gets fed and changed and carried. She doesn't get studied. And this is, the theory argues, exactly what Maggie intended. Look at what happens to intelligent women in this family. Lisa Simpson is a documented genius. Her IQ has been established at a level that places her in a genuinely rare category. She has a command of music, science, politics, ethics, and language that dwarfs everyone around her. She is, objectively and demonstrably, the most capable person in her household. And what has this gotten her? Isolation. She is consistently misunderstood by her family. She is consistently dismissed by her peers. She pushes back against authority and gets pushed back at. She argues for what she believes is right, and is right about it, and still loses. Her intelligence is her most defining characteristic, and it has made her more lonely, not less. The show loves Lisa and treats her seriously, but the world of the show is not structured to reward what Lisa is. She has been fighting a version of the same fight since the first season, and she is still fighting it in the most recent one. Maggie watched this. She watched it from the beginning. She has been present in the household for every iteration of Lisa's struggle. She has observed, with the attentiveness of a mind that misses nothing, what being the most capable person in the family gets you in a context that wasn't built to accommodate that kind of capability. And she came to a conclusion that is the opposite of Lisa's. Lisa's strategy is visibility. Demonstrate the intelligence, make the case, fight to be recognized. Accept no less than full acknowledgement of what you can do and who you are. This is an admirable strategy, and it is also a strategy that has cost Lisa enormously in terms of loneliness and the specific exhaustion of perpetual opposition. Maggie's strategy is invisibility. Don't demonstrate. Don't make the case. Don't give the environment anything to push back against. Maintain the appearance of exactly what everyone expects you to be, quiet, passive, dependent, and then operate freely in the enormous space that opens up when no one is watching you closely. The logic here is observable. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what is the consequence? The thing gets noticed momentarily and then absorbed into the background. Burns was shot and the investigation focused on every adult in town before anyone seriously considered the baby, because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because no one monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act Maggie performs occurs in the margins, in the spaces where oversight doesn't reach, and she ensures that those spaces remain available by cultivating the appearance of someone who doesn't need to be monitored. She has been doing this for 36 years. The radiation theory, applied to Maggie, produces a dark mirror image of its effect on Homer. If the contaminated environment of Springfield creates mutations, and if those mutations affect individuals differently, then Maggie and Homer represent two extreme points on the same spectrum. Homer's exposure, his decades at the plant, his childhood in Springfield's contaminated atmosphere, reduced his cognitive function to a clinical disability. Maggie's exposure, both in utero and throughout her infancy and childhood, produced the opposite effect. Where the father's neurological function was diminished, the daughter's was amplified. Same contamination source, same family, same water supply, and same irradiated air. Different effects on different biological systems, which is exactly how radiation-induced mutation actually works in real populations. The outcomes are not uniform. They are distributed across a spectrum, and the extremes of that spectrum can be very far apart. Homer and Maggie are the two poles. He is what happens when the contamination takes something away. She is what happens when it gives something extraordinary. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a dimension that shifts the whole thing. Homer is in a coma. He can't watch Maggie grow up. He can't see her walk. He can't hear her speak in full sentences. He can't learn what kind of person she becomes. The future she moves into is completely inaccessible to him. So, in the dream, he gives her the one thing he can give her without being there to see it happen. He makes her capable. He makes her extraordinary. He makes her a baby who can handle anything the world throws at her, who has more intelligence than any obstacle she'll ever face, who doesn't need him to be okay because she is, in every functional sense, already there. Her genius in the dream isn't a mutation. It's a father making sure his youngest child doesn't need him to survive. A man in a coma projecting his deepest hope onto the smallest member of his family and calling it a cartoon. But back in the waking version of Springfield, in whatever version of reality still operates there, Maggie's silence remains the final mystery. She doesn't speak because speaking would break the disguise. She doesn't reveal what she knows because knowledge in Springfield is a target. She watches everything. She remembers everything. She understands everything. And she waits. For what? The show has never answered that question. It has given us glimpses. We've seen her shoot a man. We've seen her command a room. We've seen her solve problems that stump adults who have been alive for decades. We've seen the family look to her for confirmation and trust her judgment completely. She is the most reliable source of accurate assessment in the Simpson household, and everyone who lives there knows it intuitively even if they can't articulate why. She is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot speak. And she is, by every meaningful measure of the available evidence, the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just hasn't decided what to do about it yet. And that, perhaps, is the detail that should stay with you. Not what Maggie has already done, what she's still deciding about. Behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is thinking, something is planning. Something has been watching the family and the town and the world with a clarity that nobody suspects and that nobody has ever successfully contained. When she finally decides to speak, when she breaks the silence and lets the world know what she's been carrying all this time, nobody in Springfield will see it coming. That's exactly how she designed it. Section 7. The Simpsons Predictions Phenomenon. There is a phrase that has entered common usage in the past decade that didn't exist when the show began. You'll hear it on social media constantly. You'll see it attached to screenshots from episodes that aired 20 or 30 years ago. The phrase is, "The Simpsons predicted this." It is now a reflexive cultural response to certain kinds of news. Something happens in the world. Someone finds a clip from an old episode that appears to anticipate it. The clip circulates. Comments accumulate. And the shared awe of the moment creates a particular kind of collective feeling. The sense that this specific television program, from 1989, is operating on some level of temporal or predictive access that exceeds what normal television ought to be capable of. The list of apparent predictions is long enough to sustain its own entire genre of YouTube content. Let's go through the significant ones. And then let's talk about what's actually happening, because the truth is more interesting than any theory about time-traveling writers or prophetic algorithms. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a future United States in which Lisa Simpson had become the first female president. The episode briefly established who her predecessor in office had been. It was Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. 16 years. When the episode aired, Trump had been publicly flirting with running for president since the late 1980s, had been discussed as a possible candidate in various media contexts, and was a prominent cultural figure whose name was attached to various public ventures. He was not a politician. He was, in the show's framing, the endpoint of a satirical observation about the direction of American celebrity culture and its intersection with electoral politics. And then America elected him. The internet's response to this was intense and, for a period, essentially ubiquitous. Screenshots from the episode became among the most shared images online. The phrase "The Simpsons predicted Trump" became shorthand for a whole category of cultural observation about the show's apparent foresight. People who hadn't watched The Simpsons in years were suddenly engaged with the question of how the show had known. In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a wrist-mounted communication device with a screen interface that looks, in retrospect, remarkably similar to the Apple Watch and its equivalents, which would arrive in the consumer market 2 decades later. In a 1994 episode, Homer goes to space alongside Buzz Aldrin. Commercial and civilian space tourism has since become a real and growing industry. In a 1998 episode, Homer writes an equation on a chalkboard that appears to describe something functionally similar to the Higgs boson particle's predicted mass, a decade and a half before the particle was experimentally confirmed at CERN in 2012. In a 1999 episode, Homer develops a theory about the universe being donut-shaped, a torus topology. Subsequent decades of cosmological research have produced observations that are at least consistent with a toroidal universe, though this remains scientifically contested. In a 1993 episode, a flu virus originating in Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, a rush on supplies, and a frantic community-wide search for a cure. The episode aired 27 years before a respiratory illness originating in Asia caused mass panic and a rush on supplies across the actual world. During that fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally release a swarm of killer bees. During the actual 2020 pandemic, large Asian hornets dubbed murder hornets by the media began appearing in the western United States. In 1996, Homerpalooza featured a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra for a performance while in an altered state. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years between the joke and the reality. In 1998, an episode showed Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox. Disney acquired Fox in 2019. The list continues. Video calls depicted decades before Zoom. Autocorrect failures shown before autocorrect existed. Surveillance culture described before the smart home device was a consumer product. The show has been running long enough and has covered enough terrain that a substantial catalog of apparent anticipations has accumulated. Here is what the people who actually make the show say about this. Al Jean, executive producer, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and repeatedly. His explanation is unceremonious. If you throw enough darts, you will get some bullseyes. That's it. That is the official explanation from inside the show. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, satirical observations, speculative asides, and cultural extrapolations. When you generate that volume of content over that duration of time, statistical probability alone ensures that some portion of it will align with subsequent real events. The alignment isn't prophecy. It's output volume meeting a long enough timeline. Bill Oakley, who served as showrunner during several of the show's most celebrated seasons, was even more direct. Most of these apparent predictions are coincidences, he said, because the episodes are old enough that history has had time to repeat itself. The world is cyclical. American politics, American technology, American celebrity culture, all of these domains exhibit recurring patterns. If you describe those patterns clearly enough and in enough detail, some future manifestation of the pattern will match your description. Fact-checking organizations have worked through many of the most famous predictions and found mundane explanations for most of them. The Trump prediction didn't require psychic access. It required the observation that Trump had been publicly positioning himself as a potential candidate for over a decade before the episode aired, and that the trajectory of celebrity involvement in politics was already well established and accelerating. The Disney-Fox merger didn't require insider knowledge. It required the observation that media consolidation was proceeding at an accelerating pace, and that the logical endpoint of that process was a small number of very large entities controlling most of the landscape. The smartwatch didn't require technical foresight. It required the observation that personal technology was becoming progressively smaller and more integrated into daily life. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been among the most credentialed in American television. Multiple writers have degrees from Harvard, Yale, and comparable institutions. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, physics, computer science, and political science. These are not people producing random content. They are intelligent, well-read observers of American cultural and technological trajectories, producing satirical projections of those trajectories at their logical extremes. They're not predicting the future. They're reading the present with a level of attention and analytical rigor that most public commentary doesn't apply, and then extrapolating forward a few steps. But here is where the standard debunking reaches its limit, because while it explains the majority of the predictions, it doesn't explain all of them. Some of the coincidences are specific enough that statistical probability starts to feel insufficient as the sole explanation. The Trump prediction didn't just forecast that a celebrity might win an election. It specified Trump by name and depicted him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually mirrors the actual announcement Trump made in 2015. The Siegfried and Roy episode didn't just observe that exotic animal acts carry risk. It depicted specifically a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost exactly what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of their white tigers during a live performance. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details that align with specific subsequent events in ways that exceed what the volume of darts explanation accounts for cleanly. Which brings us to the theory that is more interesting than any of the standard accounts, the possibility that The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. It shapes it. This isn't a mystical claim. It's a claim about cultural influence at scale. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have been absorbed into the cultural vocabulary in ways that operate at levels below conscious awareness. People who have never watched an episode of The Simpsons have had their understanding of American political satire shaped by the cultural ecosystem that The Simpsons helped create. When the show depicts Trump becoming president 16 years before it happens, that depiction enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It gets shared, quoted, referenced. It becomes part of how those millions of people understand the concept of a Trump presidency. It makes the idea familiar. It takes something that might, without that priming, feel like a genuine shock and converts it into something that feels, when it arrives, like recognition. We've seen this. The Simpsons already did this. The surprise is preempted by the prior cultural exposure. The show didn't predict Disney buying Fox. The show made media consolidation feel like an obvious inevitability by depicting it as straightforward satire. When Disney actually acquired Fox, the cultural response wasn't disbelief. It was a kind of tired acknowledgement. Of course this happened. We all knew it was coming. The Simpsons told us so. The cultural preparation makes the actual event feel ordained rather than contingent. Springfield doesn't reflect America from a distance. At this point, after 36 years of mutual influence, America and Springfield are in a feedback loop with each other. The show held up a mirror, and we stared into it long enough that we started to resemble what we saw. The nuclear plant and the corrupt billionaire and the incompetent local government and the population too distracted to notice the architecture of their own exploitation. These weren't predictions of where America was heading. They were diagnoses of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first, clearly enough that the pattern became visible. There's one more element to this that deserves honest acknowledgement. The Simpsons has also made thousands of jokes that haven't come true. Predictions about jetpacks and moon colonies, and specific technological developments that went in different directions. Political predictions that failed. Cultural extrapolations that didn't land. Nobody collects those. Nobody puts together a viral thread of the things The Simpsons got wrong. Confirmation bias is a force that operates invisibly on everyone, and the internet has made it a considerably more powerful force than it was before. We remember the hits with precision. We don't notice the misses. When you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations about the arc of American culture, and then you run those observations through the filtering mechanism of collective internet memory, which preserves what confirmed and discards what didn't, what you end up with is a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The hits are isolated from the misses. The accuracy rate appears much higher than it actually is. And the resulting impression that this show somehow knows things it shouldn't becomes self-reinforcing as each new apparent confirmation gets circulated and the failures continue to be invisible. The predictions aren't supernatural. They're not the product of a conspiracy or a writer's room with access to classified future projections. They are the natural output of a brilliantly observed program running for an impossibly long time, staffed by careful thinkers producing more cultural commentary than any other show in television history, filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever constructed, which is 30 years of collective internet attention. The Simpsons didn't predict the future. It wrote enough possible futures that some of them were bound to arrive. The ones that arrived are the only ones anyone remembers. And even knowing all of this, even understanding exactly how the mechanism works, it remains genuinely impressive to sit with a clip from 1997 that lines up with a headline from today. Because knowing the explanation doesn't eliminate the experience. The feeling of recognition is real even when the prophecy is statistical. And the next time a Simpsons clip surfaces from 20 years ago with something that maps to today's news, the internet will do exactly what it always does. It will share, it will marvel, and it will ask once again how they knew. Section 8. Mona Simpson and the Burns Conspiracy. There is a mystery built into the Simpson family that the show spent its first 6 seasons obscuring, then revealed in one of the most quietly devastating episodes it ever produced, and then continued to develop across subsequent seasons until the full shape of the conspiracy became visible. It involves Homer's mother, the cover-up of her existence, the billionaire who destroyed her life, and the way all of those things connect into a single, coherent account of why Homer Simpson is the way he is. For the first 6 seasons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the established fact of the show's universe. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him his mother had passed away when Homer was a young child. Abe showed Homer a grave. Homer grew up believing he was a boy who lost his mother early, and whose father, emotionally constricted and incapable of demonstrating warmth, never adequately filled the absence she left. That maternal loss, and the specific shape of the grief it produced, became the invisible architecture of Homer's personality. Homer's desperate need to be liked. His clinging attachment to Marge, his terror of abandonment that shows up in the way he responds to any suggestion that she might leave, any moment where the relationship feels threatened. His willingness to endure degradation, dismissal, and contempt from his employer rather than risk losing the one stable thing he has, which is his family. His compulsive desire for approval from people who have given him no particular reason to want their approval. All of this, the theory argues, is not character, it is coping. Homer Simpson's entire personality is a coping mechanism for a loss that turned out not to be what he was told it was. In Season 7, the show reveals the truth. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November 1995. Homer, trying to avoid a Saturday work assignment, fakes his own death by pushing a dummy off a cliff near the power plant. The town believes he's dead. Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the error, because having Homer Simpson officially listed as deceased creates administrative complications. At the Hall of Records, Homer discovers something in the municipal files. His mother is listed as alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him wasn't hers. It belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been pointing at a famous American literary figure's headstone and telling his son it was his mother's burial site. For Homer's entire life, the grave of one of America's most celebrated writers had been serving as the cover story for a woman who was very much alive and had been living somewhere else the whole time. Homer finds her. They reunite at a cemetery where Mona had been visiting what she believed was her son's grave, not knowing Homer had been reported dead by his own faked death. The reunion is genuine and the emotion the episode generates is real. A man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other in a cemetery surrounded by the graves of people who aren't them. And then Mona explains. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She didn't leave because she chose to. She left because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the event that forced her underground reached directly back to the man whose name appears on the building where Homer has worked his entire adult life. The backstory is set in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife in Springfield. She was married to Abe, she had a young son, and she was living a quiet and ordinary life while the world around her was on fire. The civil rights movement, the anti-war protests, the counterculture pulling in one direction, the established order holding in another. Something in all of that reached Mona and changed her. The show depicts her radicalization with its characteristic mixture of comedy and genuine moral weight. Mona joined a group of activists, and their target was a biological weapons laboratory owned by Charles Montgomery Burns. Read that sentence again. Burns didn't only own a nuclear power plant. He owned a facility designed to produce biological weapons in Springfield. A laboratory synthesizing weaponized pathogens in the same town where Homer was growing up, where Bart's teacher and the people in the retirement home and everyone who shops at the Quick E-Mart spent their days. Burns was manufacturing tools of mass harm within the community he also provided electrical power to, and doing it quietly enough that most of the town didn't know. Mona's group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored inside. During the chaos of the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who was Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. The germs were destroyed. And then Mona made a single, irreversible mistake. As the group fled, she stopped. Someone had been knocked down in the confusion. She helped them up. The person she helped was Burns. She looked at his face. He looked at hers. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She couldn't go home. She couldn't contact her family. She couldn't tell Homer why she was leaving or explain what she had done or reassure him that her absence wasn't about him. She kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. Burns didn't just identify Mona to the authorities. He pursued her. The show establishes across multiple episodes that Burns maintained an active, personal investment in ensuring Mona remained unable to return to her family. When she comes back to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her through a car window, immediately identifies her despite 27 years having passed, and contacts the FBI. The agents arrive at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. He now knows why she left. He knows who forced her out. The man responsible is his employer. Homer works for Burns. He has worked for Burns his entire adult life. He earns his paycheck from the man who destroyed his family. He reports to a billionaire who spent decades ensuring that Homer's mother couldn't come home. And Homer, by the time this is all disclosed, doesn't connect the dots in any sustained way. He doesn't confront Burns directly. He doesn't quit. He doesn't reorganize his understanding of his own life around this new information in a way that changes his behavior. The show treats this not as a character failure, but as a tragic symptom. Homer is not capable of making the connection. The cognitive damage, whether from the crayon, from the radiation, from decades of proximity to the plant, from whatever combination of factors has produced the particular shape of his mind, has made him unable to sustain the kind of analytical thinking that would allow him to trace the thread from his employer, to his mother, to his childhood, to his present. He can feel the loss. He cannot reconstruct the architecture of it. This leads to what the theory identifies as the actual conspiracy. Burns didn't just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona out when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally damaged in specific, useful ways. The loss of a parent at a young age, especially a parent whose absence cannot be explained or processed, produces predictable psychological outcomes. Fear of abandonment, extreme attachment to any stable source of affection, compulsive need for approval, tolerance of poor treatment from authority figures because the alternative, losing the relationship entirely, feels worse than the treatment itself. These are not random psychological outcomes. They are, from Burns's perspective as an employer, deeply convenient ones. Homer needed the job, not just financially, though that was true. He needed the job the way someone who was abandoned as a child needs the structure that a consistent workplace provides. He needed to be at the plant every day. He needed Burns to remember his name, which Burns never did, which should have been evidence of how little Burns valued him, but which Homer perpetually attempted to resolve through increased loyalty rather than reduced investment. He needed the approval that he was never going to get from that source. A competent, psychologically healthy safety inspector with accurate information about the plant's condition would have shut it down within weeks of taking the job. Homer's particular combination of cognitive limitations and emotional dependency ensured that he would stay, would endure, would overlook and forget and absorb and continue. Burns kept Homer employed because Homer was, for Burns's purposes, the ideal employee. And Homer was the ideal employee because Burns, decades earlier, had been the architect of the conditions that produced him. The show confirms the structural relationship between Burns and Homer's employment explicitly in a later revelation. Burns committed a crime and Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the plant regardless of his performance. The deal was brokered in secret and never disclosed to Homer. It is why Homer was never permanently fired, despite 742 documented errors. His job security was not a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation between his father and his mother's persecutor, maintained in silence, never explained, because explaining it would require explaining everything else. Homer's mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program. That billionaire retaliated by destroying her family. Her husband covered up the truth and struck a deal with the enemy. Her son grew up believing he was worthless, inherited the cognitive and emotional consequences of that belief, and spent his entire adult life working for the man who took her away. 3 generations of one family, shaped by one man's grudge. And Homer stands at the center of it. Too damaged to see the pattern, too dependent to break free. Going to work every morning at the plant that poisons his town. Operated by the man who stole his childhood, in a building that runs on the same contamination that may well have taken something essential from the version of himself that he could have been. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most restrained and genuinely sad moments. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. No joke, no reset, no cutaway. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them in a quiet hospital room. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always presented itself as a comedy. But underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's power and one community's inability to resist it. Mona fought and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the wrong person and buried the evidence. Homer inherited the consequences and spent a lifetime feeling their weight without ever quite understanding where they came from. Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the resources writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson works at the power plant. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 9. Where is Springfield? There is a question that has been asked about this show since its first season and has never received a definitive answer, despite the fact that more intelligent people have attempted to answer it than almost any other question in American pop culture history. The question is not complicated. Where is Springfield? Which state? Which region? Which part of the country is the town located in? This is the longest-running geographic mystery in American television, and the answer, it turns out, is not a state. The answer is a principle. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. Its population, its infrastructure, its civic geography are better known to more people than the layout of many actual American cities. The Quick E Mart, the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant, Springfield Elementary, Moe's Tavern, the Town Hall, the First Church of Springfield, the Springfield Gorge, the tire fire that has been burning for decades without anyone putting it out. These locations are embedded in American cultural memory in a way that transcends the specific geography of the show's production, and yet nobody can say definitively where any of it is. The show has been deliberately contradicting itself about Springfield's location for its entire run. Every time an episode appears to establish a geographic anchor, another episode produces contradictory evidence. Springfield borders Ohio in one episode. In another, it borders Nevada. In another, it seems to be near Maine. In another, it sits in a context that suggests Kentucky. The state abbreviation visible in certain episodes is NT, which is not the abbreviation for any American state. The area code associated with Lisa's address begins with 636, which is a Missouri code. When Homer calls the state capital in one episode, the voice on the other end establishes only that the state begins with a vowel, which eliminates some options but leaves the field substantially open. The climate of Springfield is similarly contradictory. The town has experienced tropical heat waves, severe blizzards, coastal weather, landlocked prairie conditions, and mountain weather all within the span of the series. It has oceanfront property. It also has mountains. It has a desert accessible by car from the town center. It has farmland and dense forest, and a gorge of sufficient depth and drama to serve as a recurring location for Homer's accidents. No single American state contains all of these geographic features within the driving distances the show implies. Springfield is geographically impossible. It couldn't be anywhere because it contains elements of everywhere. Matt Groening, the show's creator, appeared to resolve this definitively in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He stated that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He grew up near that city. He chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, existing in dozens of states, which meant any viewer in any region could imagine that their Springfield was the show's Springfield. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was closed. Then the episodes continued producing contradictory geographic information. Writers didn't honor Groening's disclosure. The ambiguity was maintained. The mystery was reopened. This was not an accident. The writers have confirmed, through various interviews and commentaries across the show's history, that the geographic uncertainty is a deliberate policy. Springfield's location is kept deliberately unresolvable, because a Springfield with a fixed address is worth less to the show than a Springfield that could be anywhere. The universal familiarity of the show depends in part on the universal availability of its setting. If Springfield is definitively in Oregon, then the show becomes a show about Oregon. If it's in Ohio, Ohio viewers feel seen and everyone else feels a degree of distance that wasn't there before. The ambiguity is a feature of the design. But let's apply the theoretical frameworks from earlier sections and see what Springfield's geographic impossibility looks like from inside those frameworks. Under the radiation theory, if the contamination from the power plant has been sufficient to alter the biology of every living organism in Springfield, if it has mutated the fish and changed the color of human skin and produced physiological adaptations in the human body that have no analog in uncontaminated populations, why should the effect stop at biology? Radiation affects matter. If decades of unchecked nuclear contamination can do what the theory proposes it has done to the people of Springfield, perhaps it has also done something to the physical environment. Perhaps the geography itself has been warped. Mountains compressed to driving distance. Ocean coastlines and desert terrain brought into proximity by some distortion of space in the zone around the plant. The geographic impossibility of Springfield isn't a production error. Under this framework, it's an environmental symptom. Under the coma theory, Homer's dreaming mind doesn't have a precise cartographic model of America in its memory. It has impressions, emotional associations with places, fragments of landscape seen on vacations, in films, through car windows on drives he half remembers. Mountains from a trip, ocean from a commercial, desert from a movie he fell asleep watching, farmland from driving through the Midwest. When Homer's unconscious mind assembles Springfield, it layers all of these landscape fragments on top of each other without regard for the geographic logic that would govern a conscious cartography. Dreams don't have geographic rules, they have emotional logic. And Springfield, assembled from every piece of American landscape Homer ever absorbed, feels like everywhere because it was built from everywhere, without the editorial restraint of wakefulness to separate and locate each element correctly. Under the principle and the Popper theory, the one about collective denial as civic infrastructure, a town with no fixed location is a town with no fixed regulatory authority. The EPA cannot maintain consistent oversight of a facility whose state keeps changing. Criminal investigations launched under one state's jurisdiction cannot follow a town that appears to exist in a different state in the next episode. Accountability requires an address. It requires a specific location that can be found on a map, that can be visited by investigators, that can be subpoenaed. Springfield floats between jurisdictions because floating is the only way to remain permanently above consequence. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone arrives with a badge and a map and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the human skeletons in the basement. Springfield keeps moving. That's the point. It doesn't have a location because a location can be found. The episode Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary from season 12, provided what seemed like another definitive answer. In the original broadcast, the Simpson family was described as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the state was changed. The location now depends on which version of the episode you're watching. The show gave you an answer and then made the answer contingent on format. Even when Springfield has a definitive location, that location isn't definitive. It shifts. It refuses to be fixed. Like everything else in this town, the truth of where it is changes, depending on when you look and who you ask. Every state in the country has been theorized as Springfield's home by someone with evidence and an argument to support the claim. Every theory has supporting evidence and contradictory evidence in roughly equal measure. The show has made sure of this. It has seeded every direction with material for and against, ensuring that the question remains permanently open, permanently interesting, permanently unresolvable. Springfield will never be located, not because the creative team hasn't decided, but because they decided long ago that a Springfield with coordinates is a smaller thing than a Springfield without them. A town that belongs to every viewer is worth more than a town that belongs to one state. And a mystery that can't be solved keeps people asking, which is more valuable than an answer that stops the conversation. The town lives where it needs to live for each episode. And that, when you follow it out to its conclusion, means it lives everywhere at once, which means it lives nowhere. Which means, in the most useful possible sense, it lives in the precise place where you grew up, no matter where that was. Section 10. Hans Moleman's death cycle and Ned Flanders' psychological cage. Before we reach the final mystery, there are two shorter stories that deserve attention in their own right. They don't require the extended treatment of the theories we've been working through, but they contain details that illuminate something important about Springfield's relationship with time, with suffering, and with the particular cruelty the show reserves for its most sincere characters. The first is Hans Moleman. If you've watched The Simpsons for any meaningful length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He's the tiny, elderly, visually impaired man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes. He's usually in the wrong place at the wrong time. He gets hit by vehicles. He gets crushed by objects. He gets buried, incinerated, mauled, swallowed, and otherwise subjected to the full range of catastrophic physical outcomes that a human body can experience. He is, by any reasonable estimate, the most frequently killed background character in the history of American animation. The show has killed Hans Moleman dozens of times. Not in the Halloween episodes, where death is expected and divorced from continuity. Not in dream sequences or fantasy cutaways. In regular, canonical episodes, Moleman dies, and then he appears in the next episode completely fine. No resurrection scene. No acknowledgement that he was in a life-ending situation 2 episodes prior. He simply shows up again, ready for the next iteration of his death cycle. Most viewers accept this as a running joke, one of the show's metatextual games with its own conventions. But apply the frameworks we've been working in. Under the radiation theory, Moleman represents a possibility that the theory hasn't fully addressed yet. Not just mutation in the direction of degradation or enhancement, but mutation in the direction of biological regeneration. If the power plant's contamination has altered cellular function across Springfield's population, Moleman might represent the most extreme expression of one particular alteration. A man whose cells reconstitute themselves after terminal damage. He doesn't endure harm the way Homer does. Homer endures and heals. Moleman actually ceases biological function and then resumes it. Death in Springfield is, for him, a temporary condition, a biological reset that his altered cellular architecture can perform, triggered by whatever the plant has done to his body's fundamental operating instructions. Under the coma theory, Moleman's repeated deaths serve a different function. He's a minor character in Homer's dream, a background element that Homer's unconscious mind doesn't allocate significant maintenance to. The dream produces him when a scene needs him, doesn't track his condition between appearances, and occasionally lets him lapse in ways that more centrally important characters don't. Moleman dies because Homer's dreaming brain, managing the extraordinary cognitive load of generating an entire town continuously for decades, occasionally lets the minor figures degrade. And he comes back because the dream needs to populate its background scenes and doesn't maintain separate death records for its tertiary characters. Under the collective denial framework, the town watches Moleman die, repeatedly, in public, in circumstances where his death is visible and documented, and nobody investigates. Nobody files a report. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. Springfield has normalized his death cycle the way it has normalized three-eyed fish and glowing billionaires and a principal who isn't who he says he is. The remarkable becomes unremarkable through repetition and the community's practiced refusal to examine what keeps happening. And then there's the detail about his age. Moleman once identified his age as 31. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s by any visual assessment. If he's telling the truth, and the show gives no reason to think he's lying, something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in his early 30s and converted him into someone who looks ancient, frail, nearly blind, barely mobile. Something that also made him essentially indestructible despite this frailty. Something that turned death into a revolving door while simultaneously making him look like someone who should have passed through that door decades ago. Mulman is 31 years old. He looks 80. He dies every few episodes and returns. These three facts, held together, require an explanation. Every theory in this video offers one. The only framework that doesn't is the one that says it's just a cartoon and none of it means anything, which is the one explanation that the show itself seems most invested in making insufficient. Now, Ned Flanders. Ned is the character the show has most thoroughly and most quietly destroyed, and the darkness that lives behind his relentless positivity is one of the most genuinely unsettling subtexts the series contains. The contrast with Homer is the show's longest-running structural joke. Homer is selfish, incompetent, impulsive, and constantly failing, and he gets away with everything. Ned is generous, disciplined, principled, and consistently excellent at the ordinary tasks of life, and he suffers disproportionately. His wife, Maude, was killed at the Springfield Speedway. A t-shirt cannon misfired during a race event. The intended target, Homer, dodged. The shirt struck Maude instead and knocked her off the bleachers. She died because Homer, acting in characteristic Homer fashion, put himself out of harm's way without considering the person next to him. And Ned forgave him. Of course Ned forgave him. That's what Ned does. He turns the other cheek. He extends grace. He absorbs punishment and responds with patience. But fans noticed, over time, that there are cracks in the structure of Ned's apparent equanimity. The hurricane episode is the one that makes the hidden architecture visible. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rallies to rebuild it, which seems like a warm story about neighborly solidarity. The house is rebuilt. It immediately collapses. The construction was so poorly executed, the community effort so shoddy despite its good intentions, that the rebuilt home is structurally unsound, and something in Ned breaks. He screams at the town. He says things he has been holding inside for years, possibly decades, about every person who has ever mistreated him, every slight absorbed, every forgiveness extended to someone who didn't deserve it. It's a volcanic release of something that has been building under enormous pressure for a very long time. And then he's institutionalized. The psychiatric treatment that follows reveals something crucial. Ned's niceness is not a natural character trait. It was produced. As a child, Ned was violent, uncontrollable, described as a terror by his parents, who were beatniks who didn't believe in conventional discipline. They took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through intensive behavioral modification. The treatment worked. Ned's kindness, his patience, his relentless positivity, his reflexive forgiveness of every wrong done to him. These are not expressions of who he is. They are the result of a process that restructured who he was allowed to be. His brain was rewired to suppress the anger, not to eliminate it. It's still there. It was suppressed. The hurricane episode is what happens when the suppression fails under sufficient pressure. Everything about Ned reframes once you have this information. His patience with Homer isn't saintly forbearance. It's a programmed response from a man whose brain was conditioned to prevent the expression of the emotion that Homer's behavior would naturally produce in anyone with a functioning anger response. He doesn't forgive Homer because he has genuinely processed the harm and arrived at grace. He forgives Homer because the alternative, feeling the rage and acting on it, was removed from his available behavioral options before he was old enough to choose. His faith isn't spiritual conviction arrived at through genuine engagement with questions of meaning and doubt. It's a coping framework for a man who experiences suffering without the emotional vocabulary to ask why he keeps suffering despite doing everything correctly. The church gives him a structure for accommodating the inexplicable. God has a plan. There's a reason. He just can't see it. This is a more functional belief system for someone who has been conditioned into compliance than it would be for someone with full access to their own emotional responses. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is the most devastating data point. Homer's selfishness killed Ned's wife. The direct causal chain is clear, and Ned forgave him because the conditioning left him with no other option. The rage is there. It was always there. The hurricane showed us it was there. But Ned can't reach it in ordinary circumstances because the psychiatrist's treatment built a wall around it that only fails under extraordinary pressure. The darkest reading of Ned Flanders isn't that he's sad. It's that he's the saddest person on the show, including Homer. Homer's cognitive impairment prevents him from fully comprehending the weight of his own situation. There is something almost merciful in that, a buffer between the man and the full measure of what his life contains. Lisa is young enough to maintain the belief that the future might be different, that her intelligence will eventually find a world worth being intelligent in. Burns is too powerful to be personally affected by the suffering he produces. But Ned is fully awake, fully cognitive, fully aware of every injustice, every loss, every good thing he did that went unrewarded, and every bad thing that happened to him despite his goodness. And he can't do anything with that awareness because the psychological cage built around him before he had any say in the matter won't let him convert the awareness into action. He feels everything. He can't respond to any of it in the way that a human being without his particular history would respond. And then there's the theological dimension. The show's universe includes God as a real character. God has spoken directly with Homer on multiple occasions. The two of them have had genuine theological conversations, face to face, in which God answered Homer's questions and engaged with his observations. Homer, the man who is asleep in church when he bothers to attend at all, has received divine communication. God talks to Homer. God has never spoken to Ned, the most devout man in Springfield, the man who has organized his entire life around his faith, who attends church with perfect regularity, who prays with sincerity, who has dedicated himself more fully than anyone in the town to the attempt to live by the values his faith prescribes, has never received the thing he has devoted his life to pursuing. While Homer, who has done essentially nothing to merit the conversation, has had it multiple times. This is a thesis statement from the show about how its world is organized. It is telling you that goodness is not rewarded in Springfield, not because the system is random, but because the system is organized around compliance rather than merit. Burns needs compliant workers. The town needs people who won't ask too many questions. The mechanisms of denial and forgetting and resetting require people like Ned, people who absorb what happens to them and continue, who don't become radicalized by their suffering, who stay in their place and maintain the structure. Ned's conditioning makes him the most useful kind of citizen for a town like Springfield. And the reward for his utility is continued suffering without the option of meaningful resistance. Homer does everything wrong. He gets away with everything. Ned does everything right. He loses everything. They live next door to each other. The gap between them has never closed. In 36 years, it has never once moved. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are. That's not a tragedy that exists in spite of the show's comedy. It's the argument the show has been making, quietly, every week, for 3 decades. Section 11. The Floating Timeline, Springfield's Final Mystery. We've been building toward this for a while now. Every section has been orbiting it. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the Burns immortality theory, the collective denial framework, all of them circle around this central fact without ever quite landing on it. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show debuted in December 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8, she is 8. Maggie was 1, she is 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. They still are. 36 years have passed in the real world, and 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is perpetually the viewer's present. When the episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1994, they were in 1994. The references change, the technology changes. The cultural touchstones of each episode update to reflect whatever moment the episode is being produced in. But the characters don't accumulate the time. They don't carry it with them. They exist in a state of permanent present tense, surrounded by the evidence of passing time on every side and personally untouched by it. This is the standard approach for long-running animated series. The Flintstones did it, Scooby-Doo does it, Family Guy does it. Characters in animation exist in a kind of elastic present that doesn't accrue the weight of real-time passing. The audience understands this intuitively and mostly doesn't find it troubling. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created something unique. The contradictions generated by 36 years of temporal suspension have accumulated to a point where they constitute their own kind of evidence. The timeline hasn't just floated, it has warped. The most visible consequence is the backstory problem. When the show began, Homer and Marge's history was anchored to the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. Their courtship era was decorated with period-appropriate music and fashion and cultural reference points. The whole thing was internally consistent for a couple in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. They were of that generation, and their shared history reflected it. As the floating timeline pulled the present forward, the backstory couldn't stay where it was. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they didn't meet in 1979. They met in approximately 2005. Their high school experience wasn't defined by Watergate and disco. It was defined by MySpace and early YouTube and the cultural landscape of the early 21st century. The show has adapted to this through explicit revision. Homer and Marge's origin story has been retold at least 4 times, each time placing their formative years in a different decade. They were depicted as participants in the counterculture era. Then they were grunge fans in flannel. Then they were hipsters of a more recent vintage. Then their meeting was placed in a context that implied millennial experience. The characters are the same. The love story between them is the same. But the backdrop keeps sliding forward, and each revision quietly erases the previous version without ceremony. This means Homer and Marge don't have a fixed past. They have whatever backstory the current episode requires. Their memories are not a stable archive. They are a working document, updated as needed, with each update superseding the previous version. Their origin story is a draft. It will be revised again. Under the radiation theory, the inability to age is biological. The cellular mutation produced by decades of exposure has altered the fundamental mechanisms through which the human body marks time. Cells don't divide the same way. Physiological systems don't degrade on the normal schedule. The population is locked in a form of biological stasis by whatever the contamination has done to their cellular architecture. This is consistent with what we know about radiation's effects on biological systems, though the specific outcome it proposes is the inverse of radiation's usual impact. Radiation typically accelerates aging at the cellular level. The theory requires the contamination to be working through a more specific and unusual mechanism. But within the show's logic, which has never been constrained by strict fidelity to real radiobiology, the proposal holds together. Under the coma theory, nobody ages for the simplest possible reason. They exist in the memory of a man who went to sleep in 1993. His brain can't imagine them older because it has no information about what older would look like. His children stopped accumulating new experiences for Homer the moment he lost consciousness. He can dream about events. He can generate new scenarios. But the people in those scenarios stay exactly as he last knew them, because that's the only information his dreaming mind has about who they are. Under the principle and the pauper framework, nobody ages because the town voted not to allow it. Aging implies change. Change implies disruption of the current order. Springfield's social contract, the one that makes the economy function and keeps Burns's empire intact and maintains the collective agreement about what is and isn't real, depends on stasis. People who age question things. People who age develop perspectives that they didn't have before. People who age accumulate enough distance from their own past to start seeing its patterns. Springfield's institutional survival requires that this not happen. The vote to keep things exactly as they are extends in this reading to time itself. The show has proven it can imagine its characters older. It has done it in flash-forward episodes, most memorably in Lisa's wedding from season 6, which shows Lisa as a 23-year-old woman, engaged to be married, having become a particular kind of person, intelligent, principled, still somewhat isolated, still searching. The episode is detailed and emotionally rich, and completely convincing as a version of who Lisa would become. The show demonstrably has the capacity to imagine these characters with the weight of time behind them. It simply refuses to let it happen in the main timeline. Lisa returns to being 8, Bart returns to being 10. The future is locked away after each flash forward, each glimpse through the window that shows you what would happen if time were allowed to run. The glimpse closes. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It will not permit it. This is where the mystery opens into something larger than a show about a yellow family in an impossible town. The Simpsons has been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. They have occupied that cultural position, the working-class nuclear family as the primary lens through which American domestic life is examined, since 1989. And in that position, they have become something more than characters. They have become a kind of wish. Homer must always be middle-aged, Marge must always be patient, Bart must always be on the verge of growing up and never quite arriving there. Lisa must always be the smartest person in the room who nobody listens to. Maggie must always be about to say something important that she keeps to herself. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, the show stops being what we need it to be. Bart goes to college, and that chapter ends. Lisa moves away and achieves the recognition she spent her childhood fighting for, and the fight that defined her is over. Maggie starts speaking, and the mystery that has been the most profound mystery of the whole series, what she knows, what she's been thinking, what she would say if she chose to say it, dissolves into ordinary conversation. Homer retires. Marge is left in a house that has been emptied of the chaos that structured her life. The show becomes an elegy, the story of a family that ran out of time. And there is something in American culture, something deep and persistent and not entirely comfortable to look at directly, that doesn't want that story. That wants the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together and the house always looks the same and nobody ever has to say goodbye to any of it. America pressed pause in 1989 and has been maintaining that pause for 36 years, every Sunday evening, returning to the same house and the same family and the same opening sequence with the same characters all rushing home to the same couch. The floating timeline isn't a production convenience, not anymore. It's a cultural institution. It's the thing we built to avoid the thing we don't want to look at, which is the passage of our own time and the question of what we've done with it. The characters don't age because we need them not to. Because they represent something we can't afford to let go of, the specific era of our own lives when we first encountered them, when the opening sequence played and we settled into the couch, that might have been our family's couch in a house, that might have been our family's house, and watched this other family be exactly the thing we understood families to be. That's the loop. We built it. We maintain it. We tune in every week to make sure the walls are still standing. Every time we watch, every time we laugh at a joke that aired before most of the current audience was born, every time we quote a line from a season that ended decades ago, we tighten the loop a little more. The Simpsons are trapped in the loop because we trapped them there. And every theory in this entire video, every piece of evidence and interpretation and analytical framework we've been working through, arrives eventually at this same conclusion. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental. Something that exists at the level of the show's structure rather than any individual storyline. And the something that's wrong is not the radiation, not the coma, not the collective denial, not Burns's immortality, not the prediction phenomenon, not the floating geography, not any single one of the theories we've explored. The something that's wrong is that the show can't end. Not because the network won't let it, not because the ratings are still there, not because the contracts haven't been fulfilled. It can't end because we haven't let it. Because we keep returning to Evergreen Terrace every week, because we keep watching Homer fall down and get back up, because Bart is still 10 and Lisa is still 8, and Maggie is still deciding whether now is the moment to say what she's been holding for 36 years. We built the loop, we maintain it, and until we don't, until we find the thing in ourselves that pressed pause in 1989 and confront it honestly, Springfield will keep running. The plant will keep operating. Burns will make his weekly appointments. Homer will drive to work under those cooling towers, past the river with the three-eyed fish, into the parking lot where a vending machine once fell and where, depending on which theory you follow, everything either changed or ended. Section 12. The Grand Unified Theory of Springfield. We've been in Springfield for a long time now. Let's take a step back and see the whole picture. Every theory we've examined in these sections operates on a different level of the show's reality and arrives at different conclusions. But there's something striking that emerges when you lay them next to each other. They don't contradict each other. They reinforce each other. They describe the same Springfield from different angles, each one illuminating a part of the same structure that the other theories can't fully reach. The radiation theory explains the physical facts: the yellow skin, the four fingers, the biological anomalies, the three-eyed fish, and the glowing billionaire and the man who survives everything. It gives Springfield a mechanism: the power plant leaking into the water supply, and the air, and the bodies of every organism in the town's contamination radius. It explains why outsiders look different. It explains why the animals are affected. It gives Burns a motive that extends beyond ordinary corporate greed into something more personal and more calculated. The coma theory explains the narrative facts: the tonal shift after season 4, the progressive detachment from observable reality, the celebrity flood, the impossible escalation of plot lines, the reset button between episodes, the aging freeze, Homer's physical indestructibility. All of these become internally consistent once you adopt the premise that everything since April 1993 is generated by the dreaming mind of an unconscious man who wants nothing more than for his family to still be there when he finds his way back to them. The Burns conspiracy explains the historical facts: the Mona Simpson arc, the deal between Burns and Grandpa, Homer's employment at the plant for 30 years, the specific shape of Homer's emotional damage, and how it maps onto the specific needs of a billionaire who required a permanently compliant workforce. It explains not just what Springfield is, but why it became what it is, and who benefited. The collective denial framework explains the sociological facts: why catastrophes are forgotten, why the truth is treated as a threat to be expelled, why the same mistakes recur without anyone drawing the obvious connections, why Springfield can watch a man die multiple times and never open an investigation, why the official answer to the Burns shooting was accepted despite the evidence not fully supporting it, why Ned Flanders forgives Homer for killing his wife. These aren't individual psychological responses to individual events. They're expressions of a community-level agreement that certain things are better not examined. The prediction phenomenon explains the cultural facts: how a show made in a specific moment could appear to describe future moments with such precision, how satire becomes prophecy, how cultural influence operates at a level that can shape events it appears only to describe, and how confirmation bias turns a large enough body of satirical content into what looks, from the outside, like prophetic vision. The floating timeline and the geographic impossibility explain the metaphysical facts. Springfield exists outside normal coordinates not because of lazy writing, but because it was designed to be universal, to be every American town at once, to resist the kind of specific location that would make it belong to some viewers and not others. It floats through time and space because it is meant to be permanently available, a home address that anyone can return to, regardless of where they actually live or when they're watching. Held together, these theories don't describe a cartoon family in a fictional town. They describe a system. They describe the mechanics of a specific kind of social control, one that operates through environmental damage and emotional manipulation and institutional corruption and collective agreement and the specific vulnerabilities of people who have been broken in careful, targeted ways by someone who needed them broken. They describe a population that can't see what's been done to them because the mechanism of what's been done to them prevents the seeing. They describe a town that keeps resetting because it has agreed, at a fundamental institutional level, that the reset is better than the alternative. And they describe a man who may have been unconscious for 30 years, dreaming about the one thing that mattered to him, holding his family together in his mind because his mind is the only place left where that's still possible. None of this is what The Simpsons set out to be. It began as a satirical cartoon about an American family, produced as a corrective to the idealized family portraits that dominated television at the time. It was supposed to be funny, it was supposed to be irreverent, it was supposed to puncture the fantasy of the perfect nuclear family by showing you a family that was messy and loud and imperfect and still, somehow, held together by something real. It accomplished all of that. And in the course of accomplishing it, across 36 years and 800 episodes and a cumulative cultural presence that may be without parallel in the history of the medium, it also became something else. It became a document, an accidentally comprehensive account of what American life at a certain level of economic and social existence actually looks like. When the jokes are set aside and the accumulated evidence is taken seriously, the power plant? The corrupt billionaire, The government that can't or won't protect its citizens from the documented harm being done to them. The population too cognitively impaired or too economically dependent to demand better. The medical system that manages rather than heals. The legal system that serves the interests of the people who can afford to shape it. The community that makes collective forgetting a civic virtue. All of this is in the show. It has been in the show for 3 decades, hidden, most of the time, underneath the jokes. Visible, sometimes, in the moments where the show forgets to hide it. The theories didn't invent this. The theories found it. They looked at 36 years of accumulated evidence and asked the questions that the characters inside the show have been prevented from asking. What is the plant doing to the town? Why doesn't anyone age? Who really pulled the trigger? How is Burns still alive? What is Maggie waiting for? Why does the truth keep getting expelled from Springfield? Where actually is this place? Why can't the family grow up? And the answers, assembled from the show's own evidence, are darker and stranger and more coherent than the show has ever directly acknowledged. But they're there. They've always been there. The show has been showing them to you every week for 3 decades. It just needed you to look. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is the only person in Springfield who hasn't stopped looking. She asks the questions. She pushes on the things that don't add up. She insists on the truth even when the truth is inconvenient and isolating, and comes with costs that she keeps paying. She keeps asking. The town keeps not answering. That's The Simpsons. That's what it has always been, underneath everything. A girl who won't stop asking questions in a town that has made the asking dangerous. A man who may be dreaming his family into existence because the alternative is too much to face. A baby who knows everything and has decided not to say so yet. A billionaire who has turned the contamination of a town into the mechanism of his own survival. A mother who fought for what was right and paid for it with 27 years of her son's life. A neighbor who was reprogrammed into kindness and can never get the rage back even when the rage is the correct response. And Homer, always Homer, stumbling through a world he can't quite understand, enduring things that would break anyone who could see clearly what they were, loving his family with a completeness that exceeds his capacity to express it, driving that same stretch of road every morning past the cooling towers, that may be the reason for everything wrong with his life. He never connected those dots. The radiation theory says he couldn't, because the radiation took that from him. The coma theory says he doesn't need to, because none of it is real, it's only the dream. The Burns conspiracy says the dots were arranged specifically so he couldn't connect them. And maybe all 3 of those things are true simultaneously. Maybe the most honest answer to every mystery in this video is the simplest one. Homer Simpson loved his family more than he could understand. He loved them past his ability to articulate it, past his ability to fully comprehend it, past the fog and the crayon and the radiation damage and the decades of accumulated harm. He loved them in spite of everything that was done to prevent him from holding on to them. And somewhere, in a hospital bed or in a yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, or in the perpetual loop of a show that has been on the air since 1989, the love is still running, still generating the dream, still driving toward home at 5:30 every evening, still finding Marge in the kitchen and Bart on the couch and Lisa in her room with the saxophone and Maggie in her crib watching everything with those enormous eyes. Still home. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. That's the whole point. Sleep well. Section 13. The Secret Life of Apu and the Quick E-Mart. There is a building in Springfield that appears in more episodes than almost any other location in the show's geography. It sits at a corner that feels like the center of the town's daily life. A small, fluorescent-lit convenience store open at all hours, staffed by one man who is almost always there, who appears to have been there for decades, who knows every customer by name and product preference, and who, despite the indignities regularly heaped upon his establishment, continues to show up. The Quick E-Mart, and the man behind the counter is Apu Nahasapi Mapetilon. Apu is one of the show's most layered supporting characters, and the hidden details of his life, when assembled from across multiple seasons, tell a story that most episodes never make fully explicit. He holds a doctorate in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology. He received a perfect score on his doctoral examination. He has been described in various episodes as having maintained a perfect academic record across his years of formal education. He is, in terms of raw academic qualification, among the most educated people in Springfield. He works at a convenience store. This is played for comedy in individual episodes, but it accumulates over time into something more complex. The question of how a man with Apu's credentials ended up working a cash register in Springfield for years, while navigating immigration complications and financial pressure from corporate headquarters, is not a joke once you start. Following the thread, it is a question about what America offers to the people who come to it, what the gap is between the promise and the experience, and what you do when the country you chose turns out to be something other than what you expected. Apu owes a debt to the Quick E-Mart Corporation. The debt is substantial and is depicted as the mechanism that keeps him in his current position despite the fact that his qualifications would comfortably support any number of more remunerative and less demanding careers. He has been working off this debt for years. The debt functions within the show's logic as a kind of institutional trap. It is always there, it is always demanding, and leaving would mean defaulting on an obligation that carries consequences Apu is not willing to accept. The store itself is a case study in the economics of a certain kind of small business. The Quick E-Mart sells products at prices that reflect its 24-hour availability and its convenience rather than any particular value proposition. The inventory is chaotic and sometimes alarming in its provenance. The hot dogs have been there for a duration that most food safety frameworks would find concerning. The expiration dates on certain items in the back of the refrigerator case have become theoretical rather than practical. The slushies, which the show treats as a near-sacred element of Springfield's cultural identity, are made from ingredients that the show has occasionally hinted at without ever fully specifying. Apu has been robbed so many times that the robberies have become as routine as the morning delivery. The show depicts robbery attempts at the Quick E-Mart as almost casual events, punctuating the store's normal operations with a frequency that would, in any realistic setting, constitute a serious public safety crisis. The Springfield Police Department's response time to calls from the Quick E-Mart suggests a level of institutional indifference to the repeated victimization of this particular business that is, once you notice it, difficult to attribute entirely to Chief Wiggum's general incompetence. But Apu endures. He is there every morning when Springfield wakes up, and every night when Springfield finally sleeps, or tries to. He knows everyone. He is patient with everyone. He extends credit to Homer with a frequency that suggests either extraordinary generosity or an accounting system that has stopped trying to reflect reality. He has 8 children with his wife Manjula, octuplets born in a season that treated the pregnancy as a storyline and the children as a punchline before settling them into the background of Apu's domestic life. The hidden detail about Apu that most viewers carry without fully registering is this: he chose to stay. He had every practical option to leave Springfield, to pursue work that matched his qualifications, to build a life in a context that better reflected what he was actually capable of. He stayed because of the debt, yes, but across multiple episodes, the show establishes that the debt is not the whole story. Apu has relationships in Springfield, he has a community, he has the kind of daily, granular knowledge of a place and its people that only comes from being somewhere long enough to know it completely, which takes years, and which, once you have it, is its own kind of home. He stayed because Springfield is where he became who he is. The debt is the official explanation. The real explanation is more human than that. Under the radiation theory, Apu is an interesting case. He came to Springfield from elsewhere, which means whatever the power plant has been doing to the residents, Apu came to the contaminated environment as an adult rather than having grown up in it. The effects of long-term exposure on someone whose early development occurred outside the contamination zone might be different from the effects on someone who was born and raised inside it. He exhibits some of the characteristic physical traits of Springfield residents, which could suggest that the exposure duration has eventually produced the same outcomes. Or it could suggest that the physical style of the show applies universally regardless of the in-universe logic. What's clearer is that Apu demonstrates a cognitive capacity and a practical capability that are higher than most Springfield residents, consistent with someone whose early neurological development happened outside the contamination radius. He runs a complex operation efficiently. He manages inventory, finances, customer relations, and the perpetual challenge of operating a business in a town where the police force has effectively declined to protect commercial establishments. He does this while also maintaining a marriage, raising 8 children, and participating in the community's civic and social life. If the radiation theory is correct about what the contamination does to cognitive function, Apu is evidence of the counterfactual, what Springfield residents might be capable of if their early development had happened somewhere else. Section 14. The strange case of groundskeeper Willie. There is a man in Springfield who has suffered more, by cumulative episode count, than almost any character in the show's history. He has been buried alive multiple times. He has been set on fire. He has been attacked by badgers on separate occasions in separate episodes. He has been thrown through walls, fallen from heights, been struck by objects that should leave permanent marks on a human body, and returned from each of these experiences with nothing except a new reason to be aggrieved at the universe. He is the janitor at Springfield Elementary. He is Scottish in an accent that the show has been committing to since 1989. He is groundskeeper Willie. Willie is one of the show's great unexamined characters, a man whose surface function is comedic relief and whose accumulated backstory is, once you try to assemble it from scattered episode details, something more interesting. He lives in a shack on the school grounds. He has for most of his adult life in Springfield, as far as the show has ever established. The shack is small. The living conditions it represents are by any standard very modest, and Willie appears to be completely fine with this, not resigned to it. Fine with it, the shack is his domain, and he maintains it with the same bristling territorial pride he brings to everything that he considers his. Willie's relationship with the school is structurally unusual. His employment at Springfield Elementary predates many of the administrators he reports to. He has survived the tenures of multiple principals, multiple superintendents, multiple rounds of budget cuts that should, by any rational institutional logic, have eliminated a groundskeeper position at a school that has always struggled financially. He remains. The school's grounds remain under his jurisdiction regardless of what else changes around him. There is a version of Springfield Elementary without its principal, without its teachers, without its students, that is still somehow incomprehensible without Willie somewhere on the property. His relationship with Scotland is one of the show's recurring background textures. He references the old country with a nostalgia that is real and specific and never quite explained. The show has visited his backstory in isolated episodes, revealing fragments of a life before Springfield that was difficult in ways that were more than usually difficult. War, hardship, the particular darkness of a life lived in conditions that the show depicts without fully dwelling on. Willie came to Springfield from somewhere that made Springfield look good by comparison, and the emotional weight of that is present in his character even when the episodes are playing it for comedy. Willie's physical capability is the detail that fits most cleanly into the radiation theory's framework. He is, consistently, the most physically imposing human being in Springfield. His musculature is depicted as exceptional in ways that the show treats as a running gag, but that within the show's universe represent an actual physical reality. He performs manual labor at a level that would be impressive in a much younger man. He absorbs physical punishment with a resilience that, while less extreme than Homer's, is still meaningfully above what you'd expect from a man of his apparent age in any non-Springfield context. There is one episode detail about Willie that sits in the back of every careful viewer's mind and never quite resolves. He was once revealed to have a pipe organ in his shack. Not as a joke about unexpected sophistication, though it functions that way in the episode. As a detail that, if you take it seriously, suggests that the man who lives in a groundskeeper's shack on a school's property and spends his days maintaining lawns and unclogging drains is housing a significant and expensive instrument that he plays in private, in solitude, which is a detail that opens a door into an interior life the show has always gestured at and never fully examined. Who is Willie, really? The question sounds rhetorical, but it isn't. The show has given him enough specific biographical detail across enough episodes that the answer is somewhere in there, assembled from the fragments. A man who came from somewhere hard, who made a home in a shack and made that home real, who keeps a pipe organ because something in him requires music that the rest of his life doesn't accommodate, who takes more damage than almost any character in the show and keeps showing up because showing up is the thing he decided to do, and Willie, once he has decided something, does not stop. Section 15. Lisa's saxophone and the sound of resistance. There is an instrument in the Simpson household that the show has been using as a piece of visual and emotional shorthand since the first season. Lisa's saxophone. She plays it in her room. She plays it at school. She carries it everywhere. A battered alto saxophone that has been with her longer than any other possession the show has depicted her owning. It is, for Lisa, something more than a hobby and something more than a talent. The show treats it as the primary mechanism through which she processes her experience of being herself in a world that wasn't built for people like her. The saxophone itself has a specific backstory that the show revealed in a season episode. It belonged to Bleeding Gums Murphy, the jazz musician who was Lisa's early mentor and who died in one of the show's more genuinely sad moments. The instrument is, therefore, not just Lisa's instrument. It is an inheritance. It is a connection to someone who saw her clearly and validated what she was at a moment when her family, with love and without malice, consistently failed to fully see it. The saxophone connects Lisa to Bleeding Gums Murphy, which means every time she plays it, she is playing something that has already passed through someone who understood what music is for and what loneliness is and how the two things interact. Lisa's musical ability is not a background detail in the show's universe. Multiple episodes establish that she is genuinely exceptional. Her playing has moved strangers to tears. She has performed in contexts that would challenge adult professional musicians. She has demonstrated improvisational capability and emotional intelligence in her music that the show consistently presents as being in excess of what her circumstances would normally produce. She is not just a talented kid. She is, within the show's universe, an artist. The show has always been aware of the tension this creates. Lisa is 8 years old in a household headed by a man who loves her but cannot access the parts of her that are most alive and most in need of recognition. She is 8 years old in a town that rewards the things Homer has and does not reward the things she has. She fights for recognition and receives dismissal. She advocates for what she believes in and meets resistance. She reads books in a family that watches television and plays saxophone, in a family that listens to classic rock, and holds political positions in a community that mostly hasn't thought about politics at all. The saxophone is the thing she can do when none of that is helping. When the fight is exhausting and the isolation is acute, and the sense of being fundamentally different from everyone around her is pressing in from all sides. She picks up the saxophone and the sound comes out, and the sound doesn't care about any of the context. The sound is just what it is. Honest, precise, and hers. Under the coma theory, Lisa's saxophone playing acquires a particular poignancy. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is generated by his unconscious mind, then the sound of Lisa's saxophone filtering through the hallway is something Homer treasured. It is a sound he associated with his daughter and with the particular feeling of being in a house that was full and alive and his. The dream gives him the sound, gives him Lisa in her room, door slightly ajar, the notes moving through the house, reaching him wherever he is in it. Homer never told Lisa how much he loved hearing her play, because Homer lacks the vocabulary for that kind of disclosure. But in the dream, he gives himself the sound every time it's needed, which is often, which is most evenings. The saxophone is the dream doing what the coma does, preserving the specific sensory texture of a life that is no longer accessible except through memory. The saxophone also functions as the show's primary instrument of social commentary, which is a role that was built into the character's design from the beginning. Lisa's political and ethical positions, which are generally more progressive and more carefully reasoned than anyone else in Springfield holds, are articulated through her verbal advocacy when they need to be articulated and processed through her music when the verbal articulation has failed. She plays when she's been ignored. She plays when she's lost. She plays when the fight is real and the fight is wrong, and there's nothing else to do with the energy of that. The episodes where Lisa's advocacy wins are fewer than the episodes where it doesn't. The show has always been honest about this, which is part of what makes Lisa a genuinely complicated character rather than a simple mouthpiece. She is right more often than the world around her acknowledges, and she is right in ways that matter, but being right doesn't translate automatically into being heard in Springfield, and the show doesn't pretend that it does. Lisa wins sometimes and loses often and continues, because what she isn't contingent on winning. The saxophone is how you know this. She picks it up after the losses as often as after anything else. The music comes out. The house receives it. And somewhere in the building, in the living room or the kitchen or the hallway, someone who loves her hears it and doesn't fully understand what they're hearing but feels something anyway, which is the thing that music does that arguments can't do. It reaches past the argument into something below it. Lisa has always known this. She learned it from Bleeding Gums Murphy, who left her the instrument and the knowledge simultaneously. Section 16. The Retirement Castle and the Forgotten Generation. There is a building at the edge of Springfield's map that appears in the show's establishing shots less often than the power plant or the school, but that carries, in the episodes set inside it, a weight that the more prominent locations don't always generate. The Springfield Retirement Castle is where Grandpa Simpson lives. It is where the show places most of Springfield's elderly residents. It is a building that functions, in the show's symbolic economy, as the place where Springfield keeps the people it has stopped being interested in. Abe Simpson is one of the show's most carefully drawn secondary characters, and the details the show has assembled about his life over 36 seasons constitute, when you try to hold them all at once, a portrait of a certain kind of American life in the 20th century. He served in World War II. He has told stories about his service, stories that are sometimes accurate and sometimes clearly embellished and sometimes impossible to square with other stories he has told in other episodes, which the show acknowledges as a feature of his narration style rather than a continuity error. He worked. He raised a family or tried to. He made the deal with Burns that protected Homer's employment. He lied to Homer about his mother's death for decades. Abe lives at the retirement castle. Homer visits, when he visits, with a frequency that the show depicts with complete honesty. Not enough. The visits are often motivated by guilt rather than genuine desire. They often end with Homer trying to leave before Abe has finished saying what he wanted to say. The dynamic between them is one of the show's most consistently honest emotional territories, because it depicts something that is very recognizable and very uncomfortable. The relationship between an aging parent and an adult child who loves them but cannot sustain the attention the parent needs, and the specific guilt and avoidance that dynamic generates in the child. Abe's stories are the subject of a running gag across the show's history. He begins them in the distant past, wanders through decades of tangential content, and arrives at conclusions that bear almost no relationship to wherever he appeared to be going when he started. The gag is that Abe can't tell a story. The emotional reality underneath the gag, the one that surfaces in the episodes that treat Abe most honestly, is that Abe is trying to tell a story that nobody is willing to listen to for long enough for it to make sense. He is trying to tell Homer who he is, where he came from, what happened to the family before Homer was old enough to understand it, the deal with Burns, the truth about Mona, the history that Homer has been living inside without knowing its name. Every conversation where Homer leaves early is a conversation where Abe doesn't get to finish that sentence. And the sentence never gets finished because Homer always leaves early. The retirement castle itself is depicted as an institution that is doing its job, more or less, which is to say, it is keeping the people inside it alive and relatively safe and completely separated from the parts of Springfield life that they might otherwise still be part of. The residents have access to activities and meals and one another's company. They don't have access to anything that would make their experience feel continuous with the lives they lived before arriving there. The isolation is architectural. It is built into the design. The retirement castle is a place you go when Springfield has decided you belong there, and Springfield has decided this because you are old, and being old in Springfield means you have finished being useful to the town's ongoing operations. Burns destroyed the retirement castle with a sinkhole. This is one of the offenses that generated the universal motive for the shooting at the end of Season 6. The residents were displaced. Many of them were Abe's contemporaries, people who shared with him a living memory of the Springfield that existed before the plant dominated the skyline and before anyone was asking questions about what the plant was doing to the watershed. People who might, if anyone asked them the right questions in the right order, have been able to provide a before picture of what Springfield was like, which would have made the after picture considerably harder to dismiss. They were displaced without particular ceremony. The case was closed when Burns was shot. Springfield moved on. Nobody, as far as the show establishes, went back to the elderly residents who had watched their housing be destroyed by the richest man in town and asked them what else they remembered. Abe is still at the retirement castle. He is still telling his stories. Homer still visits, when he visits. The stories still don't get finished. And somewhere in the middle of them, presumably, is the part where Abe tells Homer why his mother disappeared and who was responsible and what it meant and why the truth of it was buried for 20 years under the name of a famous poet on a headstone in a Springfield cemetery. That part is still in there. Abe just hasn't gotten to it yet. And Homer keeps leaving before the story arrives. Section 17. Bart's Potential and the Education That Failed Him. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. And across those years, the show has established one consistent and consistently under-examined fact about him. He is capable of things that his academic record suggests he isn't. The show has built its depiction of Bart around a set of characteristics that are easy to read as evidence of limited capacity. He fails his classes, he disrupts instruction, he resists every form of institutional engagement that Springfield Elementary attempts. He has been threatened with being held back multiple times. He has accumulated a disciplinary record that would have resulted in expulsion in any school system with more functional administrative mechanisms. He is, by every available metric of formal academic performance, a struggling student. And yet, across the same 36 years of episodes, the show has also shown Bart doing things that struggling students don't do. He demonstrates creative strategic intelligence in the construction of elaborate pranks that require planning, coordination, contingency thinking, and the accurate modeling of other people's behavior. He has shown, in isolated episodes when the circumstances activated something in him, an academic capability that his records don't reflect. He learns quickly when he wants to learn. He absorbs information efficiently when the information is relevant to something he actually cares about. He makes connections between things that most people wouldn't connect. He reads people with an accuracy that exceeds his years. The theory, which several episodes have approached without quite stating explicitly, is that Bart's academic failure is not a reflection of his actual capability. It is a reflection of a specific mismatch between who he is and what the educational system he was placed into is designed to reward. Bart is not the kind of intelligence that Springfield Elementary's curriculum is built to develop. He is kinetic, social, practical, interpersonal, creative, in ways that don't translate well to sitting still and processing information in the sequence someone else has determined. The things he is genuinely good at are not the things the school tests. The things the school tests are not the things he can access in a classroom context. This is not an unusual situation in real educational systems. The gap between a student's tested performance and their actual capability is often explained by a mismatch between learning style and instructional approach that the system doesn't have the resources or flexibility to address. Springfield Elementary, which is perpetually underfunded and perpetually managed by an administrator who is himself operating under constraints that prevent him from doing the job effectively, is not equipped to diagnose or address a student like Bart. It is equipped to assign failing grades and continue. The consequence, played out over 36 years, is a version of what happens to a great deal of actual human potential in under-resourced educational systems. The capability doesn't disappear. It finds other channels. It goes into the pranks and the schemes and the social navigation and the construction of alternative systems of value and respect that exist outside the official structures of the school. Bart becomes excellent at being Bart in a context that doesn't map onto any metric the school can measure, and the school's failure to measure him accurately becomes, in the show's depiction, a shared failure. His and the institutions and the communities and the economic system that keeps Springfield Elementary perpetually short of what it would need to actually serve the students. It is responsible for. Bart once had a brief period of academic achievement in an episode that sent him to a private school. The experience was complicated and didn't resolve neatly, as the show's depictions of Bart's intelligence rarely do. But the episode established that in a different environment, with different resources and different expectations and a different kind of attention, something in Bart responded. Not completely, not without resistance, but enough to show what was there. He went back to Springfield Elementary. He went back to failing. And the thing that was briefly visible in the different environment retreated back into the pranks and the schemes and the D- report cards. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. He will be 10 years old for as long as the show runs. The potential that the show has been carefully documenting will remain unrealized in the way that it is always unrealized in the episodes. which is not because it isn't there, but because the structure around it was never designed to find it. Section 18. Marge's interior life and the marriage nobody talks about. There is a version of this show that centers Marge Simpson, and it would be a darker show than the one we have. Not because Marge is a dark character, because what Marge endures, examined from Marge's perspective rather than Homer's or the family's collective perspective, is a sustained demonstration of what it looks like to choose the life you have over the life you might have had, every day, indefinitely, with full awareness of what the choosing costs. Marge is the emotional spine of the Simpson household. This is stated explicitly and implicitly in so many episodes that it has become part of the background understanding of the show. She is the person who holds things together. She is the reason the family functions as a family rather than as four separate people in the same house orbiting a common kitchen. Her patience is real, and her love for Homer is real, and her investment in her children is real, and none of that is in question. What is in question, what the show has been careful to document across multiple seasons, is what any of this has cost her. Marge has a talent for painting that the show has revisited across several episodes. She is depicted as being genuinely gifted, capable of work that has received serious recognition in contexts outside Springfield. One of the show's most discussed episodes centers on a painting she produced that attracted significant critical attention, and the complication that arose from the content of the painting and the implications of that content for her own self-image. The episode asked, more directly than most Simpsons episodes ask questions, what it means to have a gift, and to have consistently subordinated it to other priorities that felt more urgent and more necessary, and that now constitute most of your life. Marge answered that question the way Marge answers most questions. She chose the family. She chose the marriage and the household, and the role that these things required. Not with resentment, and this is important, but with full awareness. The show has always been careful to depict Marge's choices as actual choices made by someone with real alternatives, rather than as the default behavior of someone who doesn't know what else to do. Marge knows what else she could do. She has periodically done it and periodically walked away from it. The walk away is the part the show has always handled most honestly. Marge is capable of leaving. She has come to the point of leaving multiple times in the show's history, in episodes that treat this seriously rather than as a threat that will obviously be resolved before the credits roll. She has looked at her marriage clearly in those moments and seen what it is and what it isn't, and made the decision to remain every time, not from weakness. From something more complicated than weakness. Homer loves Marge with a completeness that exceeds his capacity to express it. This is perhaps the truest thing the show has ever established about him. He cannot say what he feels because he doesn't have the words and never has had them, and the radiation and the crayon and the years at the plant have made finding them less possible, not more. He shows it in fragments. In the moments when the show slows down enough to let his feelings through, usually in episodes that are explicitly about the marriage rather than incidentally containing it, those moments, when they come, have a quality that the rest of the show doesn't reach as often, because they are the moments when Homer's love gets expressed accurately rather than obscured by everything that normally obscures it. Marge sees those moments. She keeps them. They are the counterweight to everything else, to the nights when Homer fell asleep before she finished talking, to the decisions he made without consulting her that had consequences she had to manage, to the version of her life that she didn't choose and can't not be aware of. The painting, the career, the talent sitting in a corner of her mind where she checks on it occasionally, and it is still there and still warm and still hers. The marriage that nobody talks about, not publicly, not analytically, is the marriage between those two versions of Marge's experience. The one where Homer's love, expressed badly and inconsistently, and almost never in words, is enough, and the one where it isn't quite. Most episodes visit one version or the other. The ones that are honest enough to hold both at once are the episodes the show's most devoted viewers return to, because those are the episodes where The Simpsons feels like something other than a cartoon. Section 19. The Springfield Elementary Mystery: Why the School Keeps Failing. Springfield Elementary School has existed in the show since the beginning and has been failing its students with remarkable consistency across every one of those seasons. The building is underfunded, understaffed, and administered with a combination of bureaucratic paralysis and personal inadequacy that would be disqualifying in any system with adequate accountability. The teachers are largely resigned. The principle is complex in ways that, since the Tamzarian revelation, have added a layer of existential uncertainty to his already tenuous relationship with institutional authority. The superintendent is present just enough to demonstrate that the failures at the school level are known at the district level and are tolerated at the district level for reasons the district has never satisfactorily explained. And yet Springfield Elementary persists. The students continue to arrive every morning, the flag is raised, the buses pull into the parking lot, the day begins. Whatever is happening inside the building, whatever the quality of the education being delivered or not delivered, the institution endures. Lisa Simpson is the only character in the show who experiences Springfield Elementary as both completely inadequate and also the best available option. She knows what she would need to thrive academically. Springfield Elementary provides almost none of it. She advocates for better resources, better instruction, better attention to the needs of gifted students, and she does so regularly. And the school's response to her advocacy is approximately what Springfield's response to most advocacy is: polite dismissal, followed by no change. But Lisa keeps going. Every morning, she gets on the bus, she goes to school, she does the work. She sits in classes that are beneath her capability and completes assignments that don't challenge her and participates in an institution that has never been equipped to serve the specific person she is. She does this because the alternative, which would be to stop going, would require a degree of institutional opposition that even Lisa hasn't fully committed to. The school is inadequate. It is still where the children of Springfield go. It is still the structure within which her relationships with peers are organized, the context within which her social identity exists, the place where, occasionally, a teacher or a circumstance or a piece of information reaches her in a way that makes the day worth the commute. Principal Skinner, or Tamzarian, whatever name we're using under whatever theory, is a character who has spent decades trying to maintain an institution that was under-resourced when he arrived and has become more so in every year since. He genuinely believes in the school. The impersonation of Skinner, which revealed that everything he presented as his history was borrowed, didn't reveal that his commitment to the school was fake. The commitment to the school is real. The identity was borrowed. These coexist in the character without either canceling the other. He is doing the job of a real principal, with the biography of a man who doesn't exist, and the school is real, and the students are real, and the daily labor of trying to keep it running is real regardless of what name is on the office door. The oil well episode, the one that triggered the whole "Who Shot Mr. Burns" storyline, is the show's most direct examination of what it would mean for Springfield Elementary to have actual resources. For a brief period, the school had money, real money, from the oil well beneath the playground, enough to address the chronic under-resourcing that had defined its operations for as long as anyone could remember. Teachers got raises. Equipment was replaced. The building began to become what it could be if the economics of it were different. Burns took it. He redirected the oil revenue. The school returned to its normal condition. And the episode continued, as if the brief glimpse of what the school could be was just another thing Springfield had seen and lost, and was now in the process of forgetting. Section 20. The final hours falling asleep in Springfield. We've been here for a long time now. The plant is still running outside the window, the cooling towers visible against whatever sky Springfield is occupying tonight. The quick E-Mart sign is flickering at the corner the way it has been flickering for 36 years. Ned Flanders' house is dark, everything properly shut off before bed because Ned does things correctly. Homer's house has a light on somewhere inside it, probably the television in the living room, playing something Homer fell asleep to 40 minutes ago. Springfield at night is a particular kind of place. Quieter than it is during the day, obviously, but also different in some less definable way. The daytime Springfield is the one we've been analyzing. The contamination, and the conspiracy, and the theories, and the evidence. The nighttime Springfield is the one that just exists, without anyone in it asking questions or building cases or looking for patterns. The nighttime Springfield is the one where Homer is asleep on the couch, and Marge has gone to bed, and Bart is probably still awake somewhere, doing something that will become tomorrow's problem, and Lisa is reading past the time she said she'd stop, and Maggie is in her crib with her eyes open, watching the ceiling, thinking whatever she thinks. The show began in December 1989. That is a long time ago. Long enough that the people who watched the first episode as children are now the parents of children who watch the current episodes. long enough that the cultural context the show originally existed in has been replaced several times over by new contexts that the show has adapted to and incorporated and continued through. Long enough that the characters who were introduced as new, whose personalities and relationships and histories were being established for the first time, are now so familiar that encountering them feels like returning to something rather than meeting something. This is the strangest thing about The Simpsons, and it is the thing that sits underneath all of the theories and all of the mysteries and all of the evidence that we've spent these hours assembling. Not the radiation or the coma or the shooting or the immortality or the denial or the silence or the geography. Those are all interesting. Those are all worth the time we've spent on them. But underneath all of it is this: we are still here. We are still watching. After 36 years, after 800 episodes, after every argument about when the show declined, and every analysis of what the show has always been, we are still spending time in Springfield. The question of why is the final mystery, and it is the one that the theories can't fully account for. You can explain the aging freeze and the contamination and the shooting and the immortality and all the rest. You can build coherent frameworks for all of them that hold together under scrutiny. But you can't explain, through any of those frameworks, why a cartoon family from 1989 still occupies space in the minds of people who were born after the show's best seasons aired. Why people who have never met and never will meet each other share a common reference pool drawn from a fictional town in an unspecified American state. Why the couch gag still lands. Why Bart's voice still sounds like Bart. Why Homer saying something profoundly stupid is still, after all of this time, somehow the right amount of funny. The answer the show itself offers, in its best moments, is the simplest one. The Simpsons endures because what it's actually about is not the radiation or the coma or any of the other dark things that we've been excavating tonight. What it's actually about is a family that loves each other past its ability to express that love clearly. A man who drives home to the same house every evening, not because the house is perfect, or the job is good, or the town is functional, but because the people inside it are his people. A woman who chose her life and keeps choosing it. Children who are growing up, or would be growing up if the timeline allowed it, in the particular ecosystem of a family that is exactly as imperfect as all families are, and exactly as real in its love as the best families are. The mysteries are real. The evidence is there. The contamination theory holds together. The coma theory is persuasive. The shooting was never cleanly solved. Burns is an impossible man sustained by impossible means in an impossible town. Maggie knows things she hasn't said. Springfield exists everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The timeline doesn't move. All of that is true, or true enough to be worth 3 hours of a quiet night thinking about it. And underneath all of it, underneath the dark and the strange and the analyzed, Homer is on the couch. The television is on. Somewhere upstairs, Marge is asleep in the bed they share, in the house they bought with the money from the job at the plant, that poisons the town that is sealed under a dome by the government, that Homer accidentally caused when he dumped pig waste in the lake. But that's okay. That was fixed, the dome came down, the lake recovered, Springfield moved on, Homer is on the couch, his family is in the house, the plant is on the hill, the lights are on. Some nights, that's the whole story. You've been in Springfield for a long time tonight. You've heard about the contamination and the conspiracy and the silence and the theories and the evidence. You know more about what might be wrong with this town than anyone who lives there does. And now it's late, wherever you are, and the questions can stay where you've put them for tonight. The mysteries will still be there. Springfield will still be there, the way it always is, the way it always will be. The cooling towers will still be releasing their plumes into whatever sky they're under. The quick E-Mart sign will still be on. Ned Flanders is asleep. Willie is in his shack. Grandpa is at the retirement castle having a dream, probably, about something that happened before most of the town was born. Maggie is watching the ceiling. And Homer is on the couch, still dreaming, still finding his way home at the end of every episode. Still there when you come back to him, the way he always is, the way he will always be, because the dream doesn't stop and the timeline doesn't move and the family stays exactly as he last knew them. That's Springfield. That's all of it. Sleep well. Section 21. The hidden architecture of Springfield's economy. Before we settle into the final quiet, there is one more layer of this town worth examining. Not the supernatural, not the theoretical, but the economic. The way money moves through Springfield, who holds it, who does not, and what the structure of that distribution tells us about every other mystery we have examined tonight. Springfield is a working-class town. This has always been central to its identity as a satirical object. Homer earns a wage that, by every episode that has shown a pay stub or referenced his income, sits squarely in the economic range that defines the lower middle class in American life. He earns enough to own a house, to make the payments on it, to keep the family fed and the car running and the television on. He does not earn enough to have a buffer. Any significant unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Any loss of income becomes an emergency. The financial precarity of the Simpson household is a constant low-level pressure in the show's emotional atmosphere, even when individual episodes are not explicitly about money. This precarity is structural, and it is, under the theories we have been working through, deliberate. Burns owns the plant. The plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population. Burns also holds, either directly or through corporate structures the show has depicted across various episodes, substantial pieces of Springfield's other economic infrastructure. He has influence over the town's banking relationships. He has arrangements with local government that translate into policy outcomes favorable to his interests. He has, across the show's history, demonstrated a consistent understanding of how economic leverage operates in a small community where most residents depend on the same employer and the same local infrastructure. A working-class population with no financial buffer is a population that cannot afford to take risks. It cannot afford to challenge its employer. It cannot afford to lose a week's income to an illness, an injury, a legal dispute, or a period of unemployment while searching for better work. It cannot afford the time and resources that meaningful civic engagement requires. It cannot afford to send its children to schools that would give them tools for understanding and questioning the system they live inside. It cannot afford, in the most literal economic sense, the luxury of sustained resistance. This is not unique to Springfield as a satirical concept. It is a well-documented feature of economic power in many real communities. The concentration of economic power in a single employer in a geographically isolated community produces specific dynamics: increased employer leverage over wages and conditions, decreased worker mobility, reduced political independence for elected officials whose local economies depend on the dominant employer remaining operational, and a general suppression of the civic independence that would be necessary for meaningful accountability. Springfield has all of these dynamics. It has had them since the power plant was built. Burns has managed them with a sophistication that the show usually depicts as casual, almost unconscious on his part. He does not think about maintaining his economic dominance the way you would think about executing a deliberate strategy. It is just the shape of things. He built the shape and then lived inside it for so long that the shape became invisible to him, the way long-held power becomes invisible to those who hold it. Homer's wages are exactly calibrated to keep Homer at the plant. Not generous enough to give him savings that would allow real risk-taking. Not so low as to generate the kind of desperation that produces radicalization. The wage is sufficient to maintain the household at a level just stable enough that leaving feels more dangerous than staying. The specific amount is not discussed as a calculated policy within the show. It does not need to be. The outcome speaks for itself across 36 years. The town's other businesses exist in the economic shadow of the plant. Moe's Tavern derives most of its business from plant workers and their after-shift habits, which means its viability is contingent on Burns's employment decisions. The Quick E-Mart serves the convenience needs of a population working shifts and needing things at hours when other stores are not open, a need partly created by the plant's operating schedule. Springfield Elementary depends on tax revenue generated by the economic activity the plant anchors. The retirement castle houses people whose working years were shaped by the plant-defined economy. The town's financial ecosystem is organized around the plant's gravitational pull, and the plant's gravitational pull is organized around Burns's continued ownership. Burns is aware of this. Every time a character suggests shutting the plant down, or every time circumstances threaten its continued operation, the economic consequences are depicted immediately. Springfield loses its electricity. Springfield loses its jobs. Springfield loses its tax base. The town cannot function without the plant, and the plant's operation is contingent on Burns. The equation makes Burns irreplaceable. He built the town's dependence deliberately and has maintained it for decades as the primary mechanism of his security. This economic architecture connects directly back to everything else, the radiation theory. Burns profits from keeping the plant operational in its current contaminating condition because the cost of cleanup exceeds the economic value he assigns to the population's health. The economic incentive to leave the violations unaddressed is built into the profit structure of the operation. The coma theory. Homer's economic vulnerability, his inability to afford the risk of losing his job, is the anchor that keeps the dream located at the plant. The financial necessity grounds the familiar setting. The Burns conspiracy. The deal with Grandpa was an economic transaction. Burns understood that job security was the specific currency that would purchase silence from a family whose financial position made that security genuinely precious. The show has always known what it was doing with money. It has been honest, in its sideways satirical way, about what financial precarity does to people who live inside it. Homer's anxiety about money is specific and recurring and depicted with more precision than most comedies bring to economic material. Burns's power operates through mechanisms that are more than cartoonish villainy. The money is the mechanism. Everything else, the contamination, the conspiracy, the immortality, the denial, is built on top of the economic foundation Burns laid when he built the plant. Springfield did not become what it is through a single dramatic act. It became what it is through decades of small economic decisions that each seemed individually manageable and that accumulated, without anyone tracking the accumulation, into the total situation we have been examining tonight. Each safety violation left unaddressed was a decision to prioritize the profit from continued operation over the cost of remediation. Each year of Homer's continued employment was a decision to keep the mechanism of non-compliance functioning. Each arrangement with a local official extended Burns's leverage one node further into the town's institutional structure. The contamination of Springfield is the sum of these decisions. Not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense of a single evil plan executed from a control room, but a pattern of choices made by a single entity with sufficient resources to make those choices repeatedly without facing consequences. This is the architecture underneath the mysteries. Not supernatural, not theoretical, just economic. The oldest story in industrial capitalism. A company town, and what happens to the people inside one when the company has no incentive to be decent and every incentive not to be. The lights stay on. The price for the lights is everything else. Section 22. Characters we have not mentioned and should have. There are people in Springfield who have not appeared in this script yet, but who are part of the texture of the town in ways that accumulate into something important when added up. Patty and Selma Bouvier, Marge's sisters. They appear in the show as reliable antagonists to Homer, their contempt for him consistent across decades of family dinners and holiday gatherings, and the various occasions that bring extended family together in a way nobody planned carefully enough to prevent conflict. Their hostility toward Homer is played for comedy, and it lands, but underneath the comedy there is a legitimate position. They have watched their sister spend her adult life managing the consequences of being married to a man whose defining trait is the generation of manageable consequences. From a certain angle, from Patty and Selma's angle, the marriage they observe looks like a pattern they recognize and would not recommend. They are not wrong about this. They are also not simply a chorus of skepticism about Homer, because they have their own patterns and their own limitations, and the show has been careful to depict them as something more than that. They have jobs, they have routines. They have a specific and unapologetic relationship with their own pleasures, their cigarettes and their MacGyver marathons, and their particular brand of companionable resignation to life as it actually is, rather than as anyone suggested it would be. There is something honest in how they move through the world. They stopped performing optimism a long time ago and found that the world continued anyway. Sideshow Bob. A man with a doctorate who became a children's television entertainer, then attempted to murder a child, then attempted it again, across a recurring sequence of episodes that constitutes one of the show's most elaborate running threads. His obsession with Bart is treated as a sustained, satirical riff on the villain undone by fixation. It is also a portrait of what happens when extraordinary capability is organized entirely around the wrong thing. Bob is genuinely more intelligent than most characters in the show. He is also genuinely less effective than his intelligence would suggest, because that intelligence has been captured by a purpose that can never be fulfilled, and a grievance that grows more consuming the longer it goes unresolved. He had every tool the system identifies as the prerequisites for success, and he became a cartoon villain in the most literal sense, reduced by his fixation to the single dimension of a recurring antagonist in a child's life. Springfield does not produce many stories of people using their full capacity well. Bob is one of the more extreme examples of the inverse. He is also, quietly, the show's most honest portrait of what misdirected genius looks like from the outside. Impressive, elaborate, and ultimately futile. Dr. Nick Riviera, the cut-rate physician who provides healthcare to the residents of Springfield who cannot afford or are not accepted by more legitimate practices. His incompetence is one of the show's running gags, and it is also, if you follow it seriously, a portrait of healthcare access in a working-class American community. The people who see Dr. Nick are the people without good insurance, or who have let things go too long, or who need a prescription and do not have the time or resources to navigate more formal medical infrastructure. He sees them. He is not qualified to see them properly. He sees them anyway because he is there and he will take what is offered. Under the radiation theory, Dr. Nick is a particularly dark figure. He is the primary point of contact between the contaminated population and anything resembling medical oversight of their condition. His incompetence ensures that the anomalies the contamination would produce in a healthy population never get tracked or flagged or followed up on by anyone with the authority to act. Burns does not have to actively manage Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick manages the situation by simply being what he is, the comic book guy. A man who knows more about the internal mythology of fictional universes than anyone else in Springfield, and who uses that knowledge in a way that gives him specific status in a specific subculture while providing essentially no leverage. In any other context, he knows everything about comics, and that knowledge is real and accumulated and precise, and it means nothing to the plant, nothing to the banks, nothing to the town's economic or political infrastructure. It means something in the world of the store he runs, which is a small world measured in square feet, and he has made that small world entirely his own. There is a version of the comic book guy that is about the failure of capitalism to value what it does not need, about the people who develop genuine mastery in domains the economy has decided are peripheral. The show usually plays him for comedy about consumer culture and nerd identity, but the character also carries something else. The specific combination of obvious intelligence and systematic irrelevance that is more common in real American communities than the show has usually needed to acknowledge directly. These are the people in the margins of Springfield. The theories apply to the famous residents, the Simpsons and Burns, and the recurring characters whose names everyone knows. But the town is also these people, the ones in the background. The ones who keep the lights on at the Quickie Mart and dispense the wrong prescription and represent the client who deserved better and know more about something that does not pay than anything that does. They are Springfield in the truest sense. Not the famous residents, but the permanent background. The people who make the town a town rather than a set. Section 23. 36 Years of Sundays. The Simpsons premiered on a Sunday. It has aired for most of its history on Sunday evenings. There is something appropriate about this that becomes more visible the longer you sit with it. Sundays have a specific texture in the American cultural calendar. They are positioned between the week just finished and the week about to begin. They carry the particular quality of transition, the end of the weekend dissolving into the anticipation of Monday. For American families in the period when the show premiered, and in the decades since, Sunday evening was the time when the family was most likely to be in the same room together, gathered around the television before the week's obligations dispersed them again. The Simpsons colonized that time. For 36 years, on Sunday evenings, millions of American families sat down in front of their televisions and watched a different American family sit down in front of theirs. The opening sequence builds to the couch gag every time, the family converging from their separate activities and arriving simultaneously on the same piece of furniture, together. It is, when you describe it plainly, a depiction of the thing the audience was doing while watching it. A family gathering around a television, on a Sunday. This is not an accident of scheduling. The show understood what Sunday evenings meant, and built its opening ritual to reflect that meaning back at the audience. You are doing the thing that Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie are doing. You are sitting down, you are settling in. For the next half hour, the world outside the room contracts to the size of the screen and the voices coming through it. That ritual has been performed millions of times across 36 years, by people who were children when it started and are now adults with children of their own, by people who started watching with their parents and now watch with their own families, by people who watch alone in different time zones and different decades and different configurations of life than the show could have anticipated in 1989. The ritual has migrated across formats and platforms, and the technology has changed completely around it, but the core of it has not. The settling in. The invitation to come back to Springfield for another half hour. The mysteries we have spent tonight examining are part of what makes that invitation sustainable across such a long time. A show without mysteries, a show that said everything it had to say clearly and completely in each episode, would not be one you could spend 3 decades returning to. The mysteries keep something open. They give you a reason to look again at something you thought you understood. They reward the kind of attention that grows with repeated viewing rather than declining with it. The radiation theory makes every physical detail more interesting when you look again. The coma theory makes every scene of Homer in Springfield into something slightly different from what it appeared to be on first viewing. The Burns conspiracy makes the background of every Burns scene legible in a new way. The geography makes every establishing shot a small puzzle. The floating timeline makes every cultural reference an evidence point. The show has been leaving these interpretive frameworks available since the beginning, and the audience has been finding them for decades, and the finding will continue for as long as the show runs, and probably well beyond it. That is an unusual thing for a piece of entertainment to accomplish. Most entertainment is designed to be consumed and then stored in memory as having been enjoyable. The Simpsons was designed to be consumed and then returned to, examined, debated, theorized about, used as a lens for understanding the culture it was both describing and participating in. It rewards rewatching and rereading, and the kind of sustained analytical attention that we have been bringing to it tonight. Not because the writers planned all of this from the beginning. They did not. Much of it accumulated through the natural consequence of having intelligent, observant people producing large volumes of satirical content over a very long time. The patterns emerged from the work rather than being planned into it. The show became what it became through a combination of design and accident, and the particular intelligence of the people who made it and the willingness of the audience to keep looking. And here we are, 36 years later, in the middle of a Sunday night or a Tuesday night or a sleepless Thursday at some uncertain hour, somewhere in a world that Springfield has been describing and influencing and adapting to, and sometimes inadvertently predicting, still in the town, still watching the cooling towers, still wondering about the fish, still not entirely sure who pulled the trigger, still lying in the dark while Homer drives to work past the same stretch of road, past the same trees, into the same parking lot. Still home. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. The plant keeps running. The timeline keeps floating. Maggie keeps watching from her crib with those enormous eyes. And Homer is on the couch, still dreaming, the television still on, the family still there, the way they always are, the way they always will be, as long as the dream holds and the loop keeps running and we keep coming back. That is The Simpsons. 36 years, 800 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history, the most analyzed, most theorized, most examined show ever made. And after all of that, after all the evidence and all the frameworks and all the hours spent trying to understand what this place is and why it works the way it does, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town, and Homer is our father, and Marge is our mother, and Bart is who we wanted to be, and Lisa is who we should have been, and Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep hidden, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. Or maybe it is simpler than that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older now, that the couch we sat on as children while the theme played is gone, or in someone else's house, or in a landfill somewhere. And as long as The Simpsons is on, As long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down. We can turn on the television. And we can go home. To Evergreen Terrace. To Springfield. To the family that never changes. In the town that never ages. In the show that never ends. Sleep well. Section 24. Every theory at once, what Springfield looks like when you hold it all together. There is a thought experiment worth doing before we finish tonight. Take everything we have assembled, every theory and every piece of evidence and every dark implication, and try to hold it all at once. Not as separate arguments that can be evaluated one at a time, but as simultaneous truths layered over the same set of images, the same characters, the same street, the same family. You are watching Homer drive to work. He takes the same road he always takes. The plant is visible ahead, the cooling towers releasing their plumes. He has driven this route so many times that the act of driving it requires essentially no conscious participation from him. His hands know where to turn. His foot knows when to brake. The drive is automatic. Through the radiation theory, as Homer drives past the river, the contaminated water is moving beneath the bridge. The fish in that river have been altered by it for decades. Homer's own body has been shaped by it, and his brain, and the specific limits of what he is capable of thinking and understanding have been defined in part by the same water and air that produced Blinky's extra eye. He does not know this. The damage is the reason he does not know this. Through the coma theory, this drive is not happening. Homer is in a hospital bed, and this is the 8,000th time his dreaming mind has replicated the route to the plant, because the route is in his long-term memory in a way that survives even the damage the coma has done to his brain's capacity to generate new information. The drive is preserved perfectly because it was already preserved before April 1993. He has been driving it in the dream every morning since. Through the Burns conspiracy, the road Homer drives passes the power plant where his employer works. The same employer whose grudge against Homer's mother shaped Homer's childhood, whose arrangement with Homer's grandfather secured Homer's employment, whose decisions about the plant's safety posture have defined the conditions of Homer's daily exposure for 30 years. Every morning, Homer drives to work for the man who broke his family. He does not connect these things. The theory says he cannot. Through the collective denial framework, the route passes the river where the contamination is visible in the fish and invisible to the humans who use the water. Springfield has decided, collectively and repeatedly, that the fish do not mean what they appear to mean. The drive through the contaminated landscape is, in this reading, a physical enactment of the collective agreement to keep moving without looking. All of this is true simultaneously. The radiation is real, and the coma is real, and the conspiracy is real, and the denial is real, and Homer drives through all of it every morning, coffee in hand, radio on, arriving at the plant the same time he always arrives, and parking in the same spot he always parks in, and walking through the same doors he has walked through for 30 years, and sitting down at the same console where he will fall asleep. Within the first 20 minutes of his shift. This is the show. This is all of it. Not separately, not in sequence, but at once. The comedy and the horror and the love and the damage and the dream and the contamination and the conspiracy and the silence and the denial and the unanswered question about who shot the man on the sundial, all of it present simultaneously in every frame. The reason the show has sustained itself across 36 years and 800 episodes is not that it is funny, though it is. It is not that it is well written, though it has been, at its best, extraordinarily well written. It is not that the characters are memorable, though they are among the most memorable characters in the history of American television. The reason is that the show is inexhaustible. Every time you think you understand what it is, there is another layer underneath, another angle from which the same material looks different, another theory that reorganizes what you already know into a pattern you did not see before. The inexhaustibility is not an accident. It was built into the show from the beginning through the specific kind of attention the writers brought to the material, the refusal to flatten the characters or the town into simple satirical positions, the decision to let the darkness exist alongside the comedy without resolving either into the other. The radiation theory and the comedy about Homer's incompetence occupy the same space. The coma theory and the warmth of the family dynamics occupy the same space. The Burns conspiracy and the genuine affection between Homer and Burns that occasionally surfaces in the show occupy the same space. The darkness and the light are not in opposition. They are the same material viewed from different distances. This is why we keep coming back. Not because Springfield is comfortable, though it is in some ways. Not because it is reassuring, though there is something reassuring about the permanence of the Simpsons' existence, the knowledge that they will be there when you return. We come back because the show keeps having more in it than we extracted the last time. Because the theories keep being worth having. Because after 36 years and 800 episodes and more analysis than any other show has received, there is still something in there that has not been fully accounted for. Maggie is still watching. That is the detail that stays longest after everything else. All the other mysteries have at least a framework, an angle of approach, a theory that addresses them even if it does not resolve them completely. The shooting has the Maggie theory, and the Homer theory, and the Marge theory. The immortality has the radiation theory and the medical treatment explanation. The coma has the tonal shift evidence and the aging problem and the God conversation. But Maggie just watches. She has been watching for 36 years. The show has given us glimpses of what she might be thinking and has withheld the rest. She is the one mystery that remains completely in the future tense. What is she waiting for? The question has no answer within the show as it currently exists. It may never have an answer, because answering it would require Maggie to speak, and speaking would require the show to commit to what Maggie is, in a way that it has been refusing to commit to for decades. The silence is the mystery. The mystery is the silence. And as long as the show runs, as long as Maggie sits in that crib with those enormous eyes watching whatever is in front of her, the question remains. Maybe she is waiting for the right moment. Maybe she has been watching because the information she is accumulating has not yet reached the threshold at which acting on it makes sense. Maybe Springfield has not yet arrived at the moment that requires what she is capable of. Maybe the town needs something it does not know it needs, and Maggie knows what it is and is holding it until the need is acute enough to make the revelation worth the end of her cover. Or maybe she is waiting for something simpler. Maybe she is waiting for the moment when the people who love her understand her well enough that speaking feels like a gift rather than a risk. Maybe she is waiting for Homer to wake up from whatever state he is in and be present enough to hear her. Maybe she is waiting for the dream to end and the real world to begin, for the timeline to finally start moving, for the family to grow up into their futures where she can be who she actually is, rather than the performance of who she appears to be. Whatever she is waiting for, she will be ready when it arrives. That is the one thing the show has established about Maggie with absolute consistency across 36 years. Whatever comes, Maggie will be ready for it. She has been preparing since before she could walk. The plant is still on the hill. The river is still moving. The cooling towers are still releasing their plumes into the air. Homer is still on the road to work, or still in the hospital dreaming he is on the road to work, or still caught in the loop that the town's collective agreement has made permanent. Burns is still making his weekly appointment. Ned is still next door, still performing kindness, still holding the thing the conditioning will not let him put down. Willie is in his shack. Apu is behind the counter. Molman is somewhere in the background, alive again, ready for the next thing. Grandpa has a story he has not finished telling. Lisa has a saxophone she has not finished playing. Bart has a prank he has not finished planning. And Maggie is watching. She is always watching. Section 25. A Letter to Springfield. We have spent a long time here tonight. A long time with the theories and the evidence and the dark undercurrents and the unanswered questions. It is, if you are still with us, very late now, or very early depending on where you are and when you started. Before we go completely quiet, there is something worth saying directly to the town, not about it. Springfield is a fictional place. This has always been technically true and has always felt somewhat beside the point. The things that happen there are fictional. The people who live there are fictional. The contamination, the coma, the shooting, the immortality. These are fictional events in a fictional town produced by writers and animators and voice actors and directors who are real people making a real thing. And yet something in Springfield is not fictional. Something in the show accesses something real Something that exists in the actual world, and in actual families, and in actual towns, where the plant is real, and the billionaire is real, and the economic dependency is real, and the collective forgetting is real, and the gap between what the community knows and what the community can afford to know is real and painful and present. Homer is fictional. The specific combination of love and damage, and cognitive limitation, and stubborn, inarticulate devotion to his family is not fictional. That combination exists in real people. It exists in real fathers who cannot say what they mean and who show it instead in the wrong ways and at the wrong times, and who love with a completeness that exceeds their capacity to express. Homer is a cartoon. He is also everyone who ever drove to a job they hated because they needed the money, because the family needed the money and the family was the whole point. Marge is fictional. The specific combination of patience and sacrifice and hidden talent, and the particular loneliness of being the person who holds everything together, is not fictional. Marge exists in real women who made choices that felt like the right choices, and who live inside those choices with full awareness of what those choices cost. She is a cartoon. She is also everyone who chose the life they have and keeps choosing it every day in the absence of drama or declaration. Lisa is fictional. The specific combination of intelligence and isolation and stubborn refusal to stop asking questions in a world organized around rewarding different things is not fictional. Lisa exists in real children and real adults who were the smartest people in rooms that did not value that kind of smart and who kept showing up anyway. She is a cartoon. She is also everyone who ever felt like the wrong kind of right. Bart is fictional. The specific combination of potential and misdirection, and the comedy of a mind built for something that the available structures never quite offered, is not fictional. Bart exists in real kids whose capabilities were never quite met by the institutions responsible for developing them, who found other channels for their energy because the official channels were insufficient, who were funny and alive and difficult, and ultimately more than anyone measured them as. He is a cartoon. He is also everyone who was told what they couldn't do and decided to make something else out of the energy. And Maggie is fictional. The specific combination of extraordinary capability and chosen silence, the decision to be invisible in a world that would use your visibility against you, the patience of watching and waiting and understanding everything while performing the appearance of understanding nothing. That is not fictional either. Maggie exists in real people who learned early that being seen clearly is sometimes more dangerous than being overlooked, who developed their strength in private, who are waiting for the moment when it is worth spending what they have been accumulating. She is a cartoon. She is also everyone who ever decided the smartest move was to be quiet a little longer and watch. Springfield is fictional. The relationships between power and poverty, and environmental damage, and institutional corruption and collective amnesia, and the specific shape of working-class American life in the late 20th and early 21st century are not fictional. They are the things the show is actually about. They have always been the things the show is actually about. The comedy was the way to say them without the saying feeling like a lecture. The characters were the way to feel them without the feeling being abstract. 36 years, 800 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history, and still going. Whatever it is real enough to have kept us here for this long. Real enough to have generated the theories and the evidence and the hours of conversation and the community of people who care about it enough to be awake at this hour, listening to someone talk about a fictional town and its fictional mysteries. Real enough that Maggie's silence still feels like something. Real enough that Homer's love still lands. Real enough that you know, without needing to think about it, what it means when Lisa picks up the saxophone. Thank you for spending tonight in Springfield with us. The plant is still running. The timeline is still floating. The family is still on the couch. Sleep well. We will be here when you come back. Section 26. The things Springfield gets right. We have spent most of tonight examining what is wrong in Springfield. The contamination, the corruption, the conspiracy, the denial, the suffering of the good, and the impunity of the powerful. These are real elements of the show, and they deserve the attention we have given them. But before we finally rest, it is worth spending a few minutes on the inverse, the things Springfield gets right. The moments where the show depicts not dysfunction but genuine human goodness, not the dark undercurrent but the warmth that exists alongside it. Homer saves his family. Not metaphorically, not as a punchline, but across multiple episodes with actual physical and emotional stakes, Homer puts himself between danger and the people he loves. He is not good at most things. He is not reliable in most ways. He fails his family in small ways constantly and in large ways occasionally, and the show is honest about this. But when the moment requires him to act for them rather than for himself, he acts. The capacity for self-sacrifice that the show depicts in Homer is real and it is not performed. He does not do it for recognition, because Homer is not intelligent enough to calculate recognition. He does it because they are his, and the threat is there, and the math is simple even for him. This is the thing that the contamination theory and the coma theory circle around without quite accounting for. Whatever has been done to Homer's brain, whatever has reduced his cognitive function or generated the dream in which he lives, the love is intact. It survived everything. The radiation did not reach it. The crayon does not obstruct it. The decades of damage and exposure and the accumulated weight of a life lived at a low simmer of difficulty did not erode it. Homer loves his family with a completeness that the show has always depicted as the one thing in him that is fully functional, the one thing working exactly as it should. The show has always known this is the heart of it. Not the comedy, not the satire, not the mysteries or the theories or the dark undercurrents. The heart is Homer driving home, Homer arriving at the house, Homer on the couch with the family around him, doing nothing in particular, being there. That is the thing the coma dream is preserving. That is the thing the radiation did not take. That is the thing worth watching 36 years to find. Marge's love is different in kind but equivalent in depth. Where Homer's love is expressed through action, through presence, through the stubborn fact of his continued return, Marge's love is expressed through patience and maintenance and the thousands of small daily acts that keep a household and a family functional over decades. She sees Homer clearly, perhaps more clearly than anyone else in Springfield sees anyone, and she chooses him, not from resignation, from genuine, considered, reevaluated, and reconfirmed choice. The episodes where this is made explicit are among the most quietly powerful the show has produced. Lisa's insistence on truth is a form of love, though it is often perceived as something else. She keeps asking the questions that make people uncomfortable. She keeps pushing against the comfortable lies that Springfield prefers to the uncomfortable truths. She does this at real personal cost, in terms of isolation and resistance and the specific exhaustion of being right in a context that has no mechanism for rewarding being right. The show has always understood that this insistence is not arrogance or obstinacy. It is care. It is what caring about the world looks like when the world is not organized to welcome it. Even Ned Flanders, whose suffering we examined at length, is doing something real and valuable in the show's universe, despite the corruption of its origin. The conditioned kindness is not genuine in the way that freely chosen kindness would be genuine, but the outcomes of it are real. He is a good neighbor. He shows up. He helps. He forgives, even when the forgiveness is the product of psychological modification rather than spiritual development. The help is still help. The showing up is still showing up. Springfield is a better place for his presence than it would be without it, even though the person who created his current psychological architecture is a psychiatrist whose methods were questionable and whose patient never consented. And there is Burns. Burns, of all people, demonstrates something in the show that complicates the straightforwardly villainous reading we have been offering tonight. The show has, across multiple episodes, depicted Burns in moments of genuine vulnerability, genuine longing, genuine emotion that does not serve his interests and therefore cannot be entirely strategic. His feelings for Marge, however distorted they may be by his general relationship with humanity, his occasional gestures towards something like connection, the episode where he befriends Homer in a context where the power differential is briefly inverted and the friendship is, for the duration of the episode, real on both sides. Burns is the villain. He is responsible for most of what is worst about Springfield's situation. These things are true and the evidence supports them. They are also not the complete picture of a character that the show has been developing for 36 years. The complete picture includes the fact that he is very old, very sick in his specific medically maintained way, very alone in the precise manner of someone who has lived too long and done too much and burned too many bridges with everything except his own continuation. His villainy is real. His isolation is also real. The show has always held both. Springfield is not only the contamination and the conspiracy, it is also the neighborhood barbecue that Homer ruins, but that happens. It is also the recital where Lisa plays and the family sits in uncomfortable folding chairs, and Homer falls asleep, and Marge elbows him awake, and the music is real and it reaches him anyway. It is also the evening on the couch when nothing in particular happens, and nobody says anything important, and the family just occupies the same space for an hour before bed. These are the moments the coma theory says Homer is dreaming. These are the moments the radiation theory says the contamination did not reach. These are the moments that justify, in the end, whatever it cost to maintain the dream or whatever damage the contamination caused or whatever conspiracy shaped the conditions in which the family lives. The Simpsons has always been about the darkness and the warmth simultaneously. The darkness makes the warmth meaningful. The warmth makes the darkness bearable. Neither one is the real show without the other. The theories we have been examining tonight live in the darkness, examining its architecture, tracing its sources. The thing that makes the darkness worth examining is the warmth that exists alongside. Homer is on the couch, the family is in the house, the plant is on the hill. The loop keeps running, and somewhere in all of it, underneath the contamination and the conspiracy and the denial and the silence and the immortality and the unsolved shooting and the floating timeline and the impossible geography, there is a man who drives home at the end of every episode because the people inside are his people, and that is the whole reason, and that has always been the whole reason. That is what Springfield is. That is what we keep coming back to. That is what we built the loop to protect. Section 27. The last episode that never gets made. There is an episode of The Simpsons that has never been produced and almost certainly never will be. It is the one where everything resolves. The one where the loop finally breaks and the timeline starts moving, and the family grows into whatever comes next. The one where Maggie speaks her second word, and then her third, and then full sentences. The one where Bart turns 11 and then 12 and goes to middle school and eventually stops being the kid in the Dennis the Menace shirt. The one where Lisa goes to high school and finds a context finally worthy of what she is. The one where Homer retires from the plant and sits on the porch in the evenings and is, in the stillness of that, something closer to at peace than he has ever been while employed. The one where Marge picks up a paintbrush and does not put it back down. This episode will not be made. The structure of the show, the floating timeline, the commercial logic of an ongoing series, the collective agreement between the audience and the show that Springfield exists in permanent present tense, all of these things conspire to prevent it. The show cannot end because it cannot age, and it cannot age because ending would change what it is, and what it is has been too valuable to too many people for too long for the change to be acceptable. But knowing this does not prevent us from imagining it. Knowing the episode will not be made does not prevent us from having a feeling about the episode that would be made if the show could end. And the feeling is this: it would be beautiful. It would be unbearably beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when you have been waiting for them for a very long time and they finally arrive with all the weight of the waiting behind them. Bart turning 11 would be funny and sad, and exactly the kind of moment the show would handle with the specific off-handed emotional precision that has always been its greatest skill. Homer trying to understand that Bart is growing up and failing to understand it completely but getting enough of it to matter. Marge finding the words for something she has been not quite saying for decades. Lisa, for once, in a room that is big enough for her. And Maggie. Maggie finally speaking would be the moment the show has been building toward for 36 years without ever committing to it. The second word, after Daddy so long ago that most people have forgotten it happened. The second word landing in whatever scene the show would choose for it, with whatever force 36 years of accumulated silence gives a single syllable. The family going still, looking at her, really looking at her, maybe for the first time in the full sense. And Maggie, finally seen, deciding that this is the moment, that all the watching and waiting and planning and preparation has been leading here, that the disguise has served its purpose and now something else is possible. The episode will not be made. Springfield will not age. The loop will not break. Homer will drive to work tomorrow, past the same stretch of road, past the same trees, into the same parking lot, and fall asleep at the same console within the first 20 minutes of his shift. Marge will have her hair in the same tower. Bart will not have turned 11. Lisa will pick up the same saxophone. Maggie will watch. But the knowledge that the episode exists as a possibility, that the show could find its way there if the loop were ever to break, that the warmth and the love and the genuine human goodness that have always coexisted with the dark underside we have been examining are still present and still waiting to be the whole story rather than one half of it, that knowledge is part of why we keep coming back. We come back because we are waiting for the episode that will not be made. We come back because every episode that does get made is, in some small way, moving toward it. Even if the move is circular, even if it brings us back to the same place we started. The motion towards something, even when it never arrives, is not nothing. Homer driving home at the end of every episode is not nothing. The family together on the couch is not nothing. The saxophone is not nothing. Maggie watching is not nothing. These things accumulate. They become, over 36 years and 800 episodes, a body of evidence for something that all the theories we have examined tonight cannot fully account for. The persistent, irrational, structurally unjustified but nonetheless real and present capacity of this family to keep meaning something to the people who watch them. The mysteries are real. The darkness is real. Burns is poisoning the town and Homer is in a coma, and nobody shot Mr. Burns cleanly, and the principal is not who he says he is, and the geography makes no sense, and the timeline is stuck, and Ned Flanders is sad, in a way that may never be adequately addressed, and Homer loves his family more than he can understand. Marge has made her life with intention. Lisa will not stop asking. Bart is more than his record indicates. Maggie is waiting for the right moment. And that is Springfield. The whole thing. Both sides of it, held at once, without resolving either into the other, for as long as the show runs. Which is to say, for a very long time yet. The loop keeps going. We keep coming back. The family keeps being there when we arrive. Sleep well. Springfield will be here in the morning. It always is. It always will be. Springfield endures not because it is perfect or because the mysteries in it have been resolved, but because it holds something that remains true regardless of which theory you adopt, regardless of which reading of the evidence you find most persuasive. A family, 4 walls and a roof and a couch and a television and the specific noise of people who love each other moving through a shared space. The plant on the hill and the contaminated river and the sundial in the town square and the cooling towers in every establishing shot are all real, all documented, all worth knowing about. They are part of what Springfield is. They are not the whole of what Springfield is. The whole of what Springfield is includes Homer stumbling through the door at 5:30, Marge in the kitchen, Bart sliding down the banister, Lisa's saxophone, Maggie in her crib watching everything, the couch, the television, the family, together, in the house they made into a home, through the daily unremarkable labor of being there for each other even when being there was not particularly graceful or eloquent or worthy of a theory. We built the loop to protect that. We maintain it because it is worth maintaining. We come back to it because it is worth coming back to. 36 years. 800 episodes. The longest loop in American television history. Still running, still warm, still home. Good night from Springfield. For everyone watching this right now, wherever you are and whatever hour it is in your part of the world, know that the questions Springfield generates are worth the asking. The town is fictional, and the love inside it is real, and the dark undercurrents are real, and the theories are worth your time, and the show is worth yours. 36 years of Sundays. 36 years of Homer coming home. Whatever comes next in Springfield, and it will come, and we will be there when it does, the loop holds. Springfield holds. The family holds. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Sleep well.